Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto gains ability to rip someone's soul from their body, absorb it, and gain the techniques. Part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. What was it like to have been loved? Pain. The night air was filled with lights and cries as villagers clustered over a prone form. Lying within the middle, Uzumaki Naruto merely stared at the oncoming fists with dead, emotionless eyes. Not once did it betray what the boy was feeling, if anything. Not even when his small body was pounded from all sides with fists and feet. Damn demon, how dare you stay alive? Are you trying to mock my dead husband's memory? Burn in hell like the monster you are. Naruto did not respond. He had learned long ago that any words spoken up would merely prompt the villagers to attack with even more ferocity. Now, he merely kept his mouth shut, taking in the blows as best as his little body would allow. Looks like he hasn't had enough yet. Come on. Let's beat him till he's begging us. How do you like it now, demon? This doesn't even match the pain we felt when you slaughtered our families. Die like the vermin you are. Naruto gave off an involuntary gasp of pain as his body was suddenly flung straight towards a wall. It collided against the hard concrete and fell towards the ground, unmoving. The villagers did not seem to care as they continued their reckless pounding on the little boy. After what seemed like an eternity, the villagers finally left, having been satisfied with the now seemingly dead form of Uzumaki Naruto. A few of the villagers decided that more humiliation was needed for the young blonde, and so they spat on him too before leaving, not even caring as their saliva mixed with the boy's blood. Naruto simply laid there on the ground, unmoving and uncaring at how lightheaded he felt. Oh? What's this? Suddenly, a scandal stepped onto the ground where Naruto was staring. Too tired to raise his head, Naruto merely slid his eyes upward. The only things he could make out through his hazy vision were a pair of white hands and a black yukata. Tired. Naruto simply slid his eyes shut as unconsciousness began to make its way towards him. He had endured enough pain that day. He wanted rest. Kukukuku, seems I've found the most promising little test subject out there. I really must thank Sensei and this village for making it so easy. Kukukukukuku, ha ha ha. You were amazing, Hyuga-sama. Not many women would be able to move so easily barely 2 hours after birth. Hyuga Hinako, wife to the clan head Hyuga Hayashi, gave the medic Nin a warm smile. She was currently in a special room within the hospital, one used specifically for those giving birth. Although even many kunoichis would have stayed bedridden after the stress of giving birth, Hinako was already walking around, albeit very slowly, towards the incubation chambers. More importantly, how is my child? There is no need to worry, Hyuga-sama. Your daughter is nice and healthy. She is currently resting right now and your discharge should be in a day or 2. I'm glad. Hinako was tired. Although she had known the pain that childbearing would bring, actually feeling it again was another reminder entirely. Her body ached, her mind was lethargic, and her spirit was exhausted. Still, she very much wanted to see her little daughter. She wanted to see the new member in her family. A new child, a new hope for the future of the clan. Hinako, why are you out of your room? The Hyuga consort and her medic aide immediately looked away from each other and towards the person in front of them. There, standing with his arms crossed, was her husband and clan head, Hyuga Hayashi. The man was currently frowning at her quite severely, something that prompted a hidden smile on Hinako's face. Although Hayashi always preferred to maintain an aura of coolness around him, she could always tell what he was feeling underneath. To see the man being worried about her brought a small sense of joy within her. The rumors of Hyuga Hayashi being a cold and remorseless leader were proven wrong. He had a true heart. Hayashi-sama, it is nothing. Our clan medics had already treated the worst of my pains. As long as I do not exert myself, then there is no problem. I believe checking on my child is not something too strenuous. Hayashi's frown did not lighten in the least. Being able to see your own children is not something that you should be risking your health over. There are plenty of opportunities to see her when your body is healed. Nothing is more important than to be able to see your own children being safe and sound. Hinako's reply was soft, but her gaze suddenly hardened in a stern glare. Not even the love she felt for her own husband would stop her maternal instincts. Hayashi merely sighed. He knew it was futile to argue with her. Hinako was a very stubborn woman when prodded, and nothing prompted that stubbornness more than the need to see her child safe. Of course, I suppose that I was being hypocritical. Hayashi looked away in embarrassment at what happened earlier. He had just come back from a very taxing council meeting and arrived to the hospital immediately. He stayed outside of his wife's room, watching everything attentively even though he was tired. When the child was being brought over towards the incubation chamber, he had immediately rushed to his wife's side and when he knew she was all right, had rushed over again towards his child. Hanako smiled when Hayashi looked away, obviously remembering his own anxiety. She walked over towards her husband and wrapped her arms around his own. She leaned onto his broader frame as if for support and looked up to her husband kindly. "Let us go together." Such an open display of affection would have been viewed with shock by most people in the public. Their views of the Hyuga were always that of stoic warriors, emotionless as the Anbu. Hayashi coughed a little in embarrassment but nodded. The smile on Hanako's face widened as they made their way towards the incubation chamber. The room was dimly lit, so as to not irritate the slumbering infants. Such a fact was not a problem for the two Hyugas, whose bloodline allows them to have a higher sense of sight passively. The two nimbly made their way through numerous incubators until stopping on the one labeled Hyuga Hanabi. Hanako smiled and bent forward. Her hands landed gently against the glass shell and caressed the surface. "Hello, my child." Her voice came out in a soft whisper, as if she was afraid to awake the slumbering baby. "You have been very brave. The doctors were so afraid when you came out silent, but not once did you cry. You just stared up at us with that face, as if asking who we were." Tears of joy welled up within her eyes, slightly clouding her vision. "You certainly take after your father on that. Do you know why we gave you that name? It was because when one of the doctors started to wash you, you actually bit his hand." The clan consort giggled as she remembered the doctor yelping in pain. "You certainly take after your father in many things." Hanako. The warmth that Hayashi generated alone gave Hanako a strange feeling of contentment. She straightened up and nodded towards her husband. The two made their way out of the incubation chamber in silence. Nothing was needed to be said. "Hayashi-sama, Hanako-sama, how is your child?" The two Hyugas had walked out to meet two pairs of inquisitive young eyes staring up to them. Hanako smiled softly. "Hanabi is fine. She merely needs to stay for the night and after, we will head back together." More importantly, the two young girls suddenly tensed at the stern tone coming from the clan head. "Do your parents know that you are away again?" The sheepish expression adopted by the two was enough proof. Hayashi sighed while Hanako giggled. Hayashi frowned at the two young Hyugas before him. Hyuga Hikari and Hyuga Uemi were both granddaughters to clan elders and as such, they were part of the main family. However, they often ditched lessons and frequent over the hospital, preferring to adopt the role of medic needs instead of the traditional expectations from their family. While he himself was quite fond of their cheerfulness, their lack of commitment to the traditional ways of the Hyuga had roused protests from other main branch members. There were even talks of branding them with the curse seal, but Hayashi had clamped down on it quite firmly. Still, the resentment was still there from many of the other members. "Hayashi-sama." The clan head looked down towards his wife, who winked at him with a hint of mischief in her eyes. "Let's keep this visit a secret, shall we?" Before Hayashi could reply, two squeals pitched through the hallway and the clan head nearly found himself bowled over as the two young girls hugged the laughing Hanako. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Hanako patted both of their heads gently and looked over towards her husband. The expression that he had on his face was too much for her, and she giggled at the sight. It was rare to see her husband look so flustered. As the small group made their way towards Hanako's room, Uemi and Hikari spouted up question after question, bombarding the two with their curiosity. "Hanako-sama, did it hurt when Hanabi-sama was coming out? Did Hanabi-sama cry when she came out? How tired were you after? Did you break Hayashi-sama's hand when you were giving birth? Now why in the world would I do that?" Hanako giggled as she listened to all their questions. She was currently leaning against her husband for support with her arms wrapped loosely around his elbow. It's not as if he did anything too bad. "Eh? But didn't Hayashi-sama get you pregnant? I heard wives usually break their husbands' hands when they give birth to give them a taste of what it really feels like." "Ah." Hanako giggled at Uemi's outburst while Hayashi looked away once more in embarrassment. "Then should I break my dear Hayashi-sama's hand now? After all, he did arrive a little late for Hanabi." Hayashi took in the teasing good-naturedly. Hearing these relatively light-hearted jokes helped to lighten his mood, especially after the meeting he had came back from. Hayashi's eyes clouded and he frowned as he remembered the meeting from a few hours back. Meetings these days were nothing more than shout matches between two subjects, the growing political disputes between Suna and the execution of the Jinchuriki, Uzumaki Naruto. It irritated him that the council saw more reason to fight over the two subjects when they were supposed to be looking after the well-being of the village. "Hayashi-sama, is something the matter?" The clan head immediately snapped back to reality. He looked down towards his wife, who was gazing up at him with concerned eyes, and shook his head. No, he replied. Nothing is wrong. Hinako frowned, obviously unconvinced, but she remained silent. Well, you didn't answer the last question. Hikari's voice broke through the momentary awkwardness. She grinned at the group before her. Would you break Hayashi-sama's hand if you were to get pregnant again? Well, now I suppose if I get pregnant again then there would be no Cho. Before Hinako could finish her sentence, Hayashi had suddenly pushed her out of the way. Surprised, Hinako trained her eyes towards her husband, who had just blocked off a flurry of kunai and shuriken. Kakukuku, your reaction is still as sharp as ever, Hayashi-kun. That serpentine voice, coupled with that immense killer intent, brought chills down Hinako's spine. She slowly turned her attention towards the open door that led to her room. Standing there with a strange gray-haired boy beside him was a man with white skin, black yukata, long black hair, and yellow serpentine eyes. It did not take much for Hinako to recognize who that man was. Orochimaru. Sarutobi sighed, completely exhausted, as he finally lowered his ink brush. It was bad enough that he had to spend nearly 2 hours in that annoying meeting, but now when he arrived back into his administration office, he was met with a pile of unchecked paperwork. I am seriously getting too old for this. As the old Hokage leaned back in his chair and puffed on his pipe, he turned his attention towards the Hokage monument, still visible in the night. Each face stared blankly into the far expanse, emulating the resolve that each Hokage takes upon themselves when they receive the title. Seeing it reminded him of his predecessors. The Shodai, a person unrivaled in strength and wisdom, who used his own chakra to create the forests that became the borders of Konoha. He was a wise leader, an amazing teacher, and dear friend to the old Sarutobi. The Night Aim, the honorary brother to the Shodai who left the then large empire known as Mizubikure. His knowledge in Suiton techniques was so amazing and profound that he could literally create a lake that rivals those of some countries with his chakra alone. That amazing knowledge, coupled with his legendary sword, Raijin, had earned him the name as Konoha's Sea King. The Yondaime. Sarutobi sighed and gazed at the youthful face of his successor. Namikaze Minato, Konoha's Yellow Flash, was a man that inspired the village to new heights and pride. His skills were amazing, his infamy widespread, and his kindness knew no bounds. It pained Sarutobi to have been able to outlive his successor. Minato died so early, sacrificing his life to seal the powerful demon known as the Kyubi no Yoko. Do you three see this village and curse it? Sarutobi smiled sadly at the unmoving faces. Do you curse me for being too lax? Again, there was no response. There are no excuses for the wrongs committed. I cannot hide behind my old age and claim that as an excuse. Too much has already happened before and I allowed that weariness to consume me. I now see that mistake and I pledge my cause. I shall right the wrong committed in this village. Sarutobi sighed. He prepared himself for another night of reviewing when suddenly he stopped. The ink brush that was held lightly within his hand fell loose and clattered onto the ground. Sarutobi hastily stood up and snapped his head towards the hospital's direction. This chakra. It can't be. Orochimaru. The serpentine man grinned widely. His yellow slitted eyes were brimming with madness as he stared down the Hyuga head. Hayashi met his gaze coldly, adopting the form of a shinobi. As soon as he had blocked off the flurry of weapons, he had immediately switched onto his Juken stance, preparing to fight to the death. Kakukuku, as cold as always, Hayashi-kun. Why must you be like this when we have not seen each other in nearly 10 years? Hayashi remained motionless. His eyes narrowed coldly as the telltale signs of his activated Byakugan began to show. Why are you here, traitor? He spoke up calmly. Despite the situation and the monstrous killing intent around him, he remained poised. It cannot be for just a reunion. Why are you here? Why, you say? Kakukuku, there are actually 2 reasons. One is right here. He motioned towards his silent companion who was carrying an unconscious child. The gray-haired man shifted the body for a better view and the Hyugas immediately knew who it was. Battered and bloody, that child was none other than the Kyubi's jailer, Uzumaki Naruto. No, Hinako whispered to herself. The boy looked like he had been through a battlefield. Wounds were all over his body and one of his arms looked like it was hanging by a thread. The boy stirred a little and opened his eyes. Hinako immediately found herself at the receiving end of Naruto's vision. She was shocked to see his eyes dead, soulless. What had happened to him? You monster! She suddenly found herself screaming. What have you done to him? Me? Orochimaru turned his attention towards her, and if possible, his maniacal smile widened even more. Little Naruto-kun here was like this when I found him. The poor little soul was beaten and humiliated by the very villagers you weaklings protect. His voice suddenly changed tone and his smile flared into a full-fledged laugh. I really must thank you. To provide me with the perfect test subject. Orochimaru did a mocking bow before them. But I am afraid that I will need more than just one. What are you saying? Hayashi gritted his teeth in anger. What was this snake playing at? Orochimaru looked up at him and grinned. The answer is simply Hayashi-kun. The Hyuga clan head almost shuddered. Orochimaru was practically purring in his delight. I require more test subjects, nothing more. Before he could do anything, Hayashi suddenly found himself knocked against the wall. He gasped in pain, but before he could retaliate, the wall behind him began to morph. The concrete that made up the wall suddenly moved forward and wrapped around his body. What? He tried to move but found himself unable to. You dash! Now, no need for you to be so angry, Hayashi-kun. After all, it's not like I'm going to be killing anyone here. Orochimaru grinned at him before making his way towards the three Hyuga women before him. Hikari and Yumi both had been knocked unconscious by the sheer force of his killing intent, making them quite easy to take. Hinako was weakened by childbirth, and so she cannot do much. Orochimaru knelt down next to her and, ignoring the angry cries from Hayashi, placed her in a genjutsu-induced sleep. Stop! What are you doing with my wife? Kakuku, I said that I needed more test subjects, did I not? I happen to have found 3 perfect candidates. Orochimaru grinned at the pinned Hyuga. It has been quite nice to talk to you again, Hayashi-kun, but I'm afraid that Kabuto and I must take our leave. Suddenly, the forms of Orochimaru and his accomplice began to melt onto the ground. Startled, Hayashi yelled for him to stop, but it was in vain. Orochimaru had disappeared. And just after, Sarutobi, along with a squad of ANBU elites, appeared. Hayashi! What has happened? The clan head was staring at the spot before him in shock. He took them. He muttered. He took them. Who? Who did he take? My wife, my clansmen, he took them. Hayashi turned his attention towards the stricken Hokage. He also took Uzumaki Naruto. What? Hayashi looked at the spot once more, reliving the final moments where his wife was sinking into the ground along with that snake. Then, in a sudden burst of energy, he reared back his head and gave out one loud cry. It rang through the hallway, through the entire hospital, and towards the village, expressing his lamentation. Hinako! He awoke to one thing. Pain, a feeling that had been his constant companion for all of his life, was already assaulting his senses. It tore at him, ripped his consciousness, and mocked him at his powerless state. Pain. Searing pain. Oh, how he wished that it were to end. Through his entire ordeals, he had never once experienced the sheer level of intensity that this experience has just given him. Yet, despite the having his senses muzzled by the white-hot intensity of his pain, he was still able to pick up a few words spoken through the darkness. It would appear that the technique was a success. Chakra is flowing out of him in large quantities. Could this be a side effect? No matter. Continue the experiment. We do not come across such robust test subjects like these that often. Once again, that searing pain invaded his senses, causing his body to shudder against it. He opened his mouth, attempting to finally scream in pain, only to realize that his mouth was bound shut. Another jolt of pain caused him to fall once more into oblivion. It was quiet within the Hyuga mansion. In the meeting hall, those directly related to the event that took place sat down with solemn expressions. Only the 2 mothers, still bearing the loss of their children, were leaking tears in silence. To Sarutobi, who sat down with them, he could sympathize with them. Having the potential loss of their clan secrets was already a blow to the Hyuga clan, but to lose their children and wife as a whole, it must have devastated those directly related. Sitting in the middle of the group was Hyuga Hayashi. Though Sarutobi could see that he was doing his best to maintain that solemn persona, the old Hokage also knew that the abduction of his wife has brought fresh pain onto an already wounded heart. Seeing his wife abducted must have reminded him of the sacrifice he had to give in the form of his twin brother, Hyuga Hisashi. Hayashi, the Hyuga clan head, looked up from the floor mat and met the old Hokage's eyes. A moment passed between them before Hayashi looked back down onto the floor mat. Forgive me. Everyone returned his or her attention towards him in shock. To see their leader, Hyuga Hayashi, kneeling before them with his head pressed onto the floor. Forgive me. Hayashi repeated. I was too weak. In that moment of weakness, I have allowed Orochimaru to take what we hold dear. Please forgive this foolish leader for allowing your children to be taken. The woman next to him, the mother to Hyuga Hikari, suddenly began to shake. Her husband gently placed a hand onto her shoulder as her sobs began to grow louder and louder. As he held her, he stared up towards his leader with solemn, yet resolute eyes. We forgive you, he replied determinedly. And please forgive us for not allowing you the time to grieve over the loss of your own. His wife nodded, still sobbing gently against her husband's chest. Yes, your forgiveness is not something we deserve. Hayashi turned his attention towards the other side where the mother of Hyuga Uemi smiled at him. Although her own tears had not subsided yet, she bowed as well in apology. Please forgive us for not being there to protect Hinako-sama. Everyone, you have my most sincerest gratitude. Sarutobi smiled at the scene before him. Despite the heartbreak that this clan had suffered, they proved that they were indeed one of the strongest in the village by not allowing themselves to fall so readily into despair. He could see, in each of those blurry pale orbs, the burning will of fire was strong as any in the village. Smiling, he silently got up from his seat and quietly made his way out. Perhaps all hope shall not be lost. Hinako was tired. There was no other word to describe how her body screamed for a chance to finally slip into unconsciousness. However, she would not allow herself to drift into the escape that was her unconsciousness. She had already paid that price when she fainted, only to find herself a prisoner to one of Konoha's greatest traitors. Now she found herself, along with both Hikari and Uemi, bound by a seal that locked their movements. As if that did not prove soul-rending enough, they were forced to watch as Orochimaru continued with his twisted experiments upon the young Jinchuriki. The Hyuga consort flinched and looked away as another blood-curdling scream rang out from where Orochimaru was experimenting. It pained her to be bound and helpless while a child, an innocent child, was forced into so much pain. Her maternal instincts, fresh from her giving birth to Hanabi, were screaming for her to kill the one responsible for the young boy's pain. Hinako-sama. Hinako immediately returned her attention to Hikari, who had just woken up. Hinako-sama, where are we? The last thing I remembered was feeling this fear wind up within me, and then The young Hyuga immediately stopped and turned her attention towards the operating area in front of her. From what she could see, 2 men were currently operating on a small individual. Her eyes widened at the sight before her. There was so much blood. The stench of blood even overrode the faint smell of disinfectant that she could barely make out. Hinako-sama. Hikari's form was slowly beginning to shake in fear. Who are those people? Orochimaru. The young Hyuga visibly stiffened as memories from the night before assaulted her. And the one whom they are operating on is little Uzumaki. No, her voice came out in little more than a whisper. The small blonde whom she had seen on occasions was the one being operated on. She had heard of Orochimaru and his human experiments. To think that he would now do it to someone she had seen sickened her. What do we do, Hinako-sama? I don't know. Hinako bit her lip and looked down. There are no one in the village capable of defeating Orochimaru save for the 2 other Sannin and Hokage-sama himself. Moreover, I doubt that we can escape easily in this place. Both Hinako and Hikari turned and looked towards their left. Before them, Uemi slowly began to rise from her position on the ground. She tried to move but immediately found that her limbs were shackled. What? What is this? Hinako-sama? Hikari? What's going on? Hinako merely closed her eyes in sadness while Hikari explained the situation. We have been captured by Orochimaru. We don't know where this place is. To her credit, Uemi did not break down in denial as both Hinako and Hikari had expected. Instead, she merely looked down onto the floor below her in silence. Oh, forgive me, Hinako-chan. I have neglected you and those 2 young Hyugas, haven't I? All 3 snapped up and met the grinning face of Orochimaru. What shocked them the most, however, was the large amount of blood that was on his surgical clothes. Panicking, Hinako swept her eyes onto the operating table and quickly activated her Byakugan. What she saw was the bloody figure that scarcely resembled the little blonde she had seen from time to time. It looked like someone had taken the skin from his chest to torso and literally ripped it off, revealing his bleeding muscles and sinews. Kukukuku, there is no need for you to worry, Hinako-chan. The boy's little tenant will be healing him shortly. True to the Sannin's words, steam slowly began to rise from the boy's body. To Hinako's bewilderment, the areas where the skin had been ripped off slowly began to regrow itself, turning out fine, unblemished skin. It seemed that the demon did not want to die as well. Now who shall I start with? Hinako snapped back to Orochimaru's direction. The snake Sannin was staring at the 2 younger Hyugas and chuckling to himself. Both Uemi and Hikari looked at him with fear in their eyes and subconsciously tried to get away. Suddenly, the snake Sannin reached down and gripped Hikari's wrist tightly in his hand. His chuckles grew louder as the young Hyuga winced in pain. Yes, you shall do nicely. No! Uemi tried to get up but the chains bound her steady. Stay away from her. Kukukuku, this little specimen will be part of a special experiment. Orochimaru undid the chains and hauled Hikari up by her arms. His long, snake-like tongue drifted down to the trembling Hyuga and licked her cheek in a twisted form of perverseness. Very special indeed. You dash! Before Yuemi could do anything, she was suddenly backhanded across the face, sending her crashing to the floor and crying out in pain. Yuemi? Hikari tugged against the Sanin's grip, but it was useless. He was far too strong. Orochimaru merely grinned and began to tug the young Hyuga out of the room, ignoring her screams. Yuemi? Hinako-sama! Hinako narrowed her eyes angrily at Orochimaru. Her Byakugan flared heatedly against the dimly lit room, blasting the Sannin with her killing intent. However, Orochimaru merely chuckled and kept walking, completely shaking off her killing intent. She angrily cursed herself for her weakness. Now, because of it, a person that she considered to be a surrogate daughter is being taken for that man's twist experiments. Hikari the older Hyuga gazed at the younger girl in silence, lamenting her own inability to protect them. Yuemi latched on to the older Hyuga, sobbing silently in her arms. It wasn't fair. To her, Hikari was the kindest girl she had ever known, and now, she was being used for experimentation. It wasn't fair at all. It was dark from within the Hyuga compound, and not many people would stay awake at that time. The solitude provided the necessary companion that Hayashi needed so that he could finally brood over the loss of his wife and the two girls he saw as daughters. It was far too sad to go back to bed without the unconscious warmth that his wife would generate, and Hayashi himself could not help but stay awake. Orochimaru, the traitorous Sannin, had overpowered him seemingly without an effort. To think that he was one of Konoha's worst enemies was something that the Hyuga clan head was not looking forward to acknowledging. Yet he could not do a thing about it. He, the Hyuga clan head, could not do a thing against the snake, and before he knew it, that man had stolen those precious to him. Hinako, my dear wife, please forgive me for being too weak. Father? Surprised, Hayashi whipped his head around towards the opening. Almost immediately, his eyes fell upon a surprised-looking Hinata. Mentally, he cursed himself for delving so deeply into his thoughts. Had there been an assassin, he would not have known until the proverbial knife was literally on his throat. Hinata. He struggled to maintain calmness in his voice. What is the matter? You should be in bed and asleep. The 5-year-old heiress looked down almost in embarrassment. Even that small gesture reminded him of his beloved wife who, in their youth, had been just as shy if a little more enthusiastic in certain things. His heart sang with pain. Hinako was not with him. The traitorous snake took her from him, from everyone. Ayano Hayashi returned his attention towards his daughter, who was fidgeting slightly with the hem of her yukata. I couldn't sleep. Mother would always sing a lullaby, but she wasn't there today. Did something happen? Something did happen. Hayashi almost wanted to scream it out in frustration. Your mother was taken away from all of us. However, he kept his mouth shut, observing his timid daughter, who grew more and more embarrassed as time went on. Finally, he spoke up in an emotionless tone. Your mother will not be singing lullabies to you any longer. Learn to grow up, Hinata. You cannot expect someone to keep singing you to sleep every night, can you? Hinata pursed her lips, obviously disliking what he was saying. But dash. Go to bed, Hinata. But dash. Did you not hear me? Hayashi's eyes hardened into a pair of frosty orbs, and the room suddenly became denser. Unbeknownst to both Hayashi and Hinata, he was emitting a very low amount of killing intent, and while it did not cause her to faint, it frightened Hinata terribly to be on the receiving end of it. You are the heiress to the main family. You are expected to follow orders until you are old enough to give them yourself. Now this is an order issued by Hyuga Hayashi to Hyuga Hinata. Go to bed and erase any foolish notions you have of your mother ever giving you those lullabies again. Hinata literally jumped at the sound of her father's ice-cold voice. Her entire body was shaking horribly as she looked up towards her father with wide, fearful eyes. Tears quickly sprang up from those innocent lavender orbs, but she ducked her head and bowed towards her father before running out of his room in obvious distress. Hayashi kept the cold facade for a good while, and only after he was sure that Hinata was out of his Byakugan range did he even allow himself to sag back into his weary self. He truly did not mean to frighten his little Hinata so terribly, but seeing her acting so meek, so innocent, it reminded him so much of Hinako that he wanted nothing more than to swipe at that face for being such an amazing mirror. It pained him. Not only was his beloved wife gone from life, but also his little daughter bore such a strong resemblance that even looking at her causes pain in his heart. It is for her own good. He spoke up softly, as if to reassure the quiet night sky. She is kind, caring, and loving. Many will see this as either a sign of weakness. Orochimaru took 3 examples, my wife and both Hikari and Yuemi. Hinata will need to grow strong both emotionally and physically if she is to survive in this world. Despite what he was saying, Hayashi could barely ignore the twist his heart would go through as he uttered each and every syllable. It was as if his very being was rejecting the idea, but he remained firm. He stared up towards the night sky and made a promise to treat both Hinata and Hanabi as nothing more than potential heiresses. He will look on not as Hayashi, their father, but as Hyuga Hayashi, the clan head. From where he was sitting, Hayashi noted the sudden absence of chirpings and croaks of the natural animals that made their home in his pond. It was as if they disapproved of his resolve almost as much as his heart was. Hayashi remained silent as he stared up towards the silent white moon, looking for the answers that were not present, looking for the signs that were not shown, looking for the hope that was not there. Naruto slowly opened his eyes from within the dim room. Just long has it been since he had felt anything besides pain. Naruto could not even count the number of times where he simply wished that he could die. Yet despite many wounds he had suffered, despite so much blood that had been shed, Naruto's life simply would not be extinguished. He could not even decide if that was a blessing or a curse. "I see that you're awake, Naruto-kun." The young blonde turned his head to his right, and immediately met the gaze of an emotionless Yukushi Kabuto. The young teen slid his glasses in place once more and indicated towards a tray beside him. In it, he could see a syringe already filled with a clear liquid. Naruto's already dimmed eyes clouded even further. "It is time for your next test. Please try and relax this time." The blonde did not even reply. He knew that if he struggled, he would merely be restrained forcefully, and in the end, all his effort would be futile. Naruto merely closed his eyes and remained motionless. Soon, he heard Kabuto's footsteps reach closer and closer until he could practically feel his presence being next to him. "I see you've realized how useless it is to resist, Naruto-kun. Now this might hurt a little, but I'm sure Orochimaru-sama's latest creation will not kill you." A slight prickle in his arm signified the syringe injecting its fluids. And then, pain flooded his system once more. Naruto's eyes sprang wide open as his entire body began to convulse. His mouth opened in a silent scream as his entire body seared with pain. Nerves that lay dormant from within his body suddenly sprang up as if they were being electrocuted. Bones that fell into obscurity suddenly sprang up within human fissures. Even his mind, which had been dulled with countless atrocities, roared and pounded through his skull as if it was seeking to break free. "It seems that the concoction is working. Oyasumi, Naruto-kun." Naruto, despite his pain, managed to turn his gaze towards the retreating Kabuto. Through the hazy field of pain, he made a promise to seek retribution for what has happened to him. His half-lidded eyes narrowed coldly at the retreating medic before finally succumbing once more into the abyss. From outside Naruto's cell, Kabuto suddenly stiffened as an enormous and very potent killing intent pounded through his forehead. Sweat began to build from his body and he tensed in intimidation against the horrifying figure it projected, but just as soon as it appeared, it disappeared just as quickly. He waited for a few moments, searching for any more signs of that previous killing aura. When he found none, he sighed and resumed his way out. "Truly you are growing up to be a very frightening child, Naruto-kun." Kabuto could only shake his head as the final remnants of his fear drifted into the back of his mind. As he made his way through the long corridor, the young medic Nin allowed his mind to drift towards the two subjects that Orochimaru saw fit to experiment on. Uzumaki Naruto, the container for the Kyubi no Kitsune, was probably the most perfect test subject one could hope for. While his body by itself was quite fragile, nearly all experiments performed on Naruto would heal a few days later, proving the amazing capabilities of the fox's regeneration. However, there were definitely some experiments that left some very peculiar side effects. Kabuto could still remember the very first experiment that Orochimaru had performed on the boy. It was a new technique trapped in the form of a seal that he had developed in the hopes of obtaining everlasting youth. But instead of making the body grow younger, the seal actually accelerated his growth. By the time the seal had been taken off, Naruto had actually aged a full year. That was probably the first time Kabuto had ever seen Orochimaru give such a pleased smile. While he does not hope to even comprehend what goes through the snake's head, Kabuto had a feeling that the technique would be used more and more as time grew on. And yet something doesn't feel right. Kabuto narrowed his eyes and allowed his memory to drift back onto the young blonde. Although he became more docile after learning how futile it was to struggle. However, there were rare moments where his killing intent alone was enough to freeze Kabuto in his tracks. He knew that it was not the Kyubi, as the chakra being emitted was pure human, and yet, that volume coupled with that berserker rage was enough to match Orochimaru on a bad day. Orochimaru-sama can be breeding a monster for all we know. Kabuto merely shook his head and looked down on his clipboard. His face soon broke out in a pleased smile as he read the name that was next. Hyuga Hikari. The other experiment that Orochimaru had pursued was trying to pursue a theory he developed. There had been rumors in the ninja world of just which jujitsu evolved from which. Orochimaru, thinking that the Sharingan was evolved from the Byakugan, took away the Hyuga to be experimented on, but after the development of that aging seal, the young Hyuga girl was made to serve another purpose: breeding. And it is experiments like these that I prefer to stay. Kabuto can only allow a dark chuckle to escape his throat as he remembered the experiment quite vividly. After all, he was the one honored with deflowering the Hyuga. Seeing her tearful expression from that time, coupled with the sheer joy of being so dominant, had awakened the old blood from within him. He hadn't stopped until she was very much into her unconsciousness. He stopped and looked up towards the door in front of him. Kabuto smirked upon reading the experiment number on the door before opening it. Inside, the strapped form of Hyuga Hikari immediately glared at him from where she was. Kabuto chuckled and walked over towards her. He then leaned down and gently stroked her bloated stomach, causing an involuntary shiver to run down the girl's frame. "And how," he murmured, "is our child doing?" Her response was immediate. The retaining bed actually shook with the force she used to free herself, but the straps on her limbs were doing their job well. She was not going anywhere anytime soon. Kabuto merely smirked and waved a finger mockingly towards her. "Ah," he admonished. "You shouldn't be trying to hurt yourself, not when you are so ready to give birth to our little baby." "She's not our baby," Hikari snapped back. "She's mine. There is no way I can allow a child, any child, to be left with the likes of you." Her head snapped to the side as she was struck with a violent blow. "Oh dear me. You must forgive me. My hand had just slipped that moment." Kabuto grinned darkly as he cupped her chin, forcing her to look directly at him. "Now what was it that you were saying?" Hikari responded by spitting on his face. The blood mixed with the saliva splattered on his cheek and dripped down, but Kabuto ignored it. "You may have given me this child in the worst way possible, but she is still my child." Hikari gritted her teeth in anger. "And there is no way you can get her either than over my dead body." "Oh, is that all it will take?" Kabuto's grin widened upon seeing her suddenly stiffening even more. "I'm sure that can be arranged. Good day to you, my dear." The light-haired medic then walked out of the room, completely ignoring the sudden growth of fear and despair from within. Next on the list is Hyuga Hinako opened her eyes as the darkness of the room lightened up. From where the door was, she could see the familiar form of Yakushi Kabuto looming over her. Mentally, she cursed the man once more for having stolen Hikari's innocence. However, she was unable to do anything at all. The chains that bound her stopped her from doing anything hostile to the teen. Next to her, Yuemi stirred restlessly against the light that broke through the darkness. When she opened her eyes again, they looked around, dazed, before settling on Kabuto's silhouette. "You. How are you two doing today? Orochimaru-sama would be very displeased if he were to learn that our two guests would die without us noticing." Hinako narrowed her eyes angrily. Her fists immediately clenched themselves in anger at the mocking tone Kabuto used. Seeing this, Kabuto shook his head and sighed. "Anger does not suit one such as yourself. Try and calm down a little, Hyuga-sama." Yuemi tried to get herself free, but the manacles held firm. Kabuto swiveled his eye towards the young Hyuga and smirked. Almost immediately, Yuemi began to struggle harder than ever. She needed a chance, small as it can be, to get to that man and utterly destroy him. However, there were no chances, and even as the silver-haired youth walked over towards her with that belittling smirk of his, she knew that her chances of striking him were slim to none. And so, even though Kabuto jerked her face upwards to meet his cold eyes, her arms fell limp to her side. Still, she maintained her defiant stare and refused to look away from the one who raped Hikari. The silent stares continued for a small while until Kabuto, obviously losing interest, released his hold on her cheek and instead, backhanded her harshly. Yuemi gave a silent gasp as her entire body fell to the side from the force of his blow. As she struggled to get up, Kabuto reached down and grabbed a fistful of her raven black hair and yanked her face upwards to meet his eyes once more. "I do not appreciate those eyes of yours, little Hyuga." His already cold onyx orbs hardened even more. "Know your place in this world. You dash." Before Yuemi could continue, Kabuto backhanded her once more. He gave a cruel smirk when some blood began to pool from the Hyuga's mouth. However, before he could continue on his fun, the killing intent in the room suddenly flared to life. The medic stiffened and immediately turned his attention towards the Hyuga matriarch. Hinako's eyes were blazing with her activated Byakugan, and although the manacles were searing with chakra-suppressing seals, her chakra was flaring so highly that it could be seen all around her. Kabuto immediately stiffened and backed off from the wounded Hyuga. Now. He held up his hands in what he hoped was a placating manner. "Anger really does not suit you, Hyuga-sama." The placating manner only served to infuriate her even more. Hinako's Byakugan flared with anger, and the manacles around her wrists and ankles began to vibrate with the force of her chakra. Leave. Although her voice came out as just a whisper, the killing intent that was pounding against Kabuto's skull made it very clear what she wanted from him. The medic Nin hastily scribbled some recordings onto the clipboard and moved along. Although he was often hailed as a talented shinobi, Kabuto himself knew his limits. Testing them against an enraged Hyuga matriarch was not a very wise choice, especially when the chakra suppression seals were clearly being hard-pressed to hold in her chakra. As soon as he was out of the room, Kabuto narrowed his eyes and slammed his fist onto the opposite wall. Neither the pain that followed nor the sudden collapse of the wall did anything to improve his mood as he stormed off towards his research room. Hyuga Hinata carefully checked herself in front of the mirror in her room, looking for anything that would look out of the ordinary to those that will be seeing her from now on. Although she was a shy girl, and one who will most likely stay quiet for years to come, she definitely wanted to make a good first impression on whomever she will be meeting. She didn't want anyone else to think of her being weak. The young heiress winced at some past memories and rubbed her arms as if to remember what had happened from before. Her clan had already labeled her slow progress in the Juken as a sign of a failure, and as such, trainings were made even more intense in an effort to at least grow some talent from within her, even though she knew that it was probably useless. However, what awaited her were not the forbidding walls of the Hyuga clan. What awaited her was the new life in the Shinobi Academy. Even if it were to be impossible for her to achieve any talent in the title of heiress, she figured, at least she would be able to perhaps be of some use to other people during missions. Hinata perked up a bit at that. Yes. She thought with optimism. I can try and help others even if I am just a failure. Hinata shook her head to clear the invading depression. She quickly slipped on her scandals and made her way out of the building, stopping only to pray to the picture of her mother. Well then. I'll be off, mother. The young Hyuga walked out of the compound and after sliding the door from behind her, hurried out towards the academy. As she made her way through the streets that led to the academy, Hinata could not help but remember back onto the time when she would be able to walk down these roads with perfect contentment onto her face. That felt like an eternity ago. Hinata bit her lip as memories of past happiness emerged from within her subconscious. Back then, everything had been full of happiness and joy. Back then, she had the love of her mother and father. Now, her mother is gone, presumed dead, and her father sees her as nothing more than a failure onto the clan's legacy. The elders, who had always viewed her from a distance with what she thought as apathy, regarded her as a weakling, who is unfit to bear the mantle of heiress, and many even began to speak of labeling her younger sister as the heir while moving her into the branch family. Hinata blinked and stopped her running. Her small delicate hands slowly felt up her cheeks and to her surprise, what greeted her fingers were trails of warm liquid. Was she crying? Hinata shook her head and rubbed her eyes furiously in an attempt to stop the tears. Yet despite her efforts, the tears kept pouring out. Hinata was glad that there was hardly anyone on the streets. If any of them caught her crying so freely, she would be shamed for life. Hinata didn't like it. The tears, the loneliness, the loss of her mother, the coldness of her father, even the loss of her own will. She wanted someone to be there for her. Despite what may happen should she be caught doing so, Hinata desperately wanted a shoulder to cry on. She wanted someone to take away the loneliness that plagues her heart. Hey, what's wrong? The young Hyuga snapped her head upward, horrified that someone had finally seen her crying. However, when her eyes focused upon the one who spoke to her, she couldn't believe what she saw. Standing before her, in a loose beige shirt and black shorts, was a boy whom she had seen numerous times walking through this very street. His body was small, even for his age, belying innocence to his form that made many think him to be younger. His clothes looked worn, as if they had been through many things before finally given to the boy to wear. His bright sapphire eyes stared back at her with confusion, and although they appeared large and naive, there was a definite darkness into his eyes, as if he had experienced so much already in his young age. Etched upon both sides of his cheeks were 3 whisker-like birthmarks, which, in her opinion, made him look cute. Finally, his golden blonde hair spiked around in a messy tumble, as if to illuminate the sun's rays. Hinata found herself transfixed as the boy cocked his head to the side in a questioning manner. She knew the boy from somewhere. Although it has been such a long time since she has seen him, a name fluttered from just below the surface. Hinata closed her eyes and thought. His name was. My name's Uzumaki Naruto. What's your name? That's right. Hinata opened her eyes again and for the first time in a while, she gave out a warm smile. She remembered the kindness that he had given her in the past, how he would play with her as if titles did not matter. Most of all, she remembered the smile that he had. It was so radiant that it resembled the sun in all its glory. Naruto-kun. The boy suddenly turned mischievous. He turned around, walked away before turning back towards her and beckoning her with his hands. Come on! I want to show you something. He suddenly disappeared around the corner and perplexed. Hinata followed after him. It was difficult to catch up to the young blonde as he seemingly disappeared and reappeared in places one would not think possible. Still, Hinata managed to always keep him in sight and was never too far behind in her pursuits. Come on! We're almost there! Hinata panted as she kept running after the elusive blonde. They had been running for some time now, and although some would marvel at her stamina, Hinata knew that she was already at her limit. Still, she continued pursuing the blonde, her face set upon a determined expression. Soon, streets and shops became little more than blurs as she focused solely on following the blonde. Haha, good job, Hinata-chan. Look around, we made it. Hinata immediately stopped and bent forward in an attempt to catch her breath. She panted again and again as the sweat slowly dripped from her face and onto the ground from below. Yet, to her surprise, a gentle breeze swept past her, cooling her rather quickly. Hinata slowly straightened up and looked around to see where she was. Her mouth opened up and she gave out a gasp. All around, there were trees thick and tall, surrounding the area where she was in. At the very center, a rocky shore gave way to a beautiful-looking river that shone brightly in the sunlight. The churning of water then prompted Hinata to look a little more to the right, and her heart fluttered at the sight of a magnificent-looking waterfall churning out sparkling clear water. It's beautiful, isn't it? Hinata looked to her side and stared at the form of the little blonde who led her to the secret place. Naruto was grinning at her, seemingly proud of knowing of such a beautiful place. Hinata smiled. She remembered now. It was from their first meeting that Naruto had led her towards this place, and it was here that he proclaimed her to be his first friend. Tears sprang up from her pale lavender eyes and Hinata bowed her head to wipe them off as quickly as possible. Hey, what's wrong? A gentle weight, filled with warmth, lightly fell upon her head. Hinata looked up, still trying to wipe her tears. Naruto was right in front of her, rubbing her head awkwardly with one of his hands. Hinata looked back down, ashamed that she revealed a weakness towards someone. Even when it came down to holding on to her emotions, she failed miserably. Hey, it's okay. Hinata looked up once more. Naruto was smiling at her, and at that moment, she was reminded of just how warming his real smile was. She quickly wiped away the remainder of her tears and gave the boy a grateful smile. Then, it suddenly occurred to her that Naruto's form looked off. For some reason, the light on his skin shone even more brightly than what can be considered natural. Also, he did not even look any different from the first time she had met him nearly a year ago. Now Hinata-chan, this will be our little secret, okay? Naruto grinned once more and suddenly, Hinata understood. Tears slowly sprang up towards her eyes once more, but she made no move to wipe them away. Instead, her smile grew as her heart sang in both longing and joy. She closed her eyes in gratitude towards him and gave a silent whisper. Thank you? When she opened her eyes again, Naruto was gone, as if he was never there. Hyuga Hinako slowly opened her eyes from within the dark room. All around her, the dampness of the walls gave way to the monotonous sound of dripping water. The darkness from within the room seemed to grow and distort, bearing the appearances of horrifying beasts straight from a person's nightmares. The Hyuga immediately closed her eyes again. It has been much too long for her being inside the room. Every second being alive, every second being stuck within the room, it just reminded her that a person that she cared for was going to have her only child experimented on. It pained her to think that she was powerless to do anything about it. Hinako-sama, the Hyuga matriarch, immediately activated her Byakugan, glancing towards the general direction of the voice. There, lying a few feet from her, was Hyuga Uemi, who was also activating her Byakugan. Hinako stayed silent for a bit but thought better and replied quietly. Yes, Uemi-chan? Today is the day, isn't it? Hinako nodded and Uemi's eyes immediately welled up with tears. It's not fair, Hikari-Nizan shouldn't have to deal with this. Why does Kami-sama hate us so? Uemi's form curled up into a ball and she began to shake as soft sobs echoed through the room. Hinako stayed quiet, not trusting herself to speak either. However, she did shuffle a little closer to the grief-stricken Hyuga and wrapped her arms around her. It was the only comfort she could give. Today was the day Hikari's child should be born. Ha ha ha. It would appear that the operation was a success, Orochimaru-sama. It has the bloodline. Ha ha, no. Good. Take it to the incubation chamber. I shall start my preparations soon. And no G, give her back. Understood. What shall we do with her? Her nerves are practically destroyed. She cannot fight even if someone were to heal her forever. I have a plan. Her body may be useless now, but those eyes kukukukukuku. My child, give me back my child. Give me back my child. Uzumaki Naruto awoke from his troubled slumber to hear a scream of agony and despair. It echoed through the silent halls and reached all the way to his own room, piercing his silence with the sorrow that it held. Someone must have just lost something dear to them. Whoever it was, Naruto felt a sense of empathy for them. Oh? What's this? Naruto-kun, you're actually not pretending to be asleep? The young blonde's head swiveled to the side, immediately falling onto the smirking form of Yakushi Kabuto. His eyes narrowed coldly, and immediately, the restraints tightened against the force of his attempts to free himself. Here was one of the reasons why his life in this place had been like nothing but hell. Kabuto smirked, feeling a sense of accomplishment upon seeing Naruto's face. It still never got old whenever the young boy's eyes would grow cold, or the way his bindings would strain but never break. It was like watching a beast trying to claw at you only to have a leash pulling it back, reminding it that it was just a captured animal. Today will be quite a treat for your Naruto-kun. Don't worry, you'll like it for sure. Before the young blonde could reply, Kabuto inserted a familiar syringe into his arm. The last thing he saw was the smirking boy's face before descending once more into darkness. Hinako's eyes snapped open in alarm as the chambers suddenly echoed with a scream of pain. Her eyes widened in horror at the sheer intensity of that pain. It was as if someone's very being was being torn in two. Her mouth parted open in disbelief as she uttered out her name. Hikari. Hinako-sama. Yumi's voice spoke up harshly, reverberating in the prison room. When the Hyuga matriarch looked over, Yumi's eyes were lit up with her Byakugan and her expression was one of fury. When she spoke, her voice trembled with the rage that was in her. What are they doing to Hikari Nizan? Hinako shook her head. It was impossible for her to know even with her Byakugan. Judging by the length of the echoes, the distance was much too far for her to have any hope of reaching it. Frustration rose up within her at not being able to know what was happening to someone that she treasured so deeply. It angered her that she could do nothing about it. Suddenly, another scream echoed through the hallways and both Hyugas snapped up in attention. They knew that voice, for they had heard him before in the streets, protesting to shinobis and citizens alike for their hatred towards him. At that moment, his scream was so full of agony that Hinako closed her eyes and wanted to look away in shame. Just what in the world were they doing to the two of them? For what seemed like hours, the screams continued, filling the hallways and echoing out in long, tortuous pitches. Hinako closed her eyes and covered her ears, in an attempt to block out the heart-wrenching noise that spilled through their cell. Then, suddenly the screams changed. Hinako's eyes snapped open and she uncovered her ears as she sought to find out what was so different. The noise still echoed continuously through the hall, yet something was amiss, something was not right. But what? Hinako-sama, the captive matriarch, returned her attention to young Yumi, who was shaking in horror, her eyes wide in desperation. Her voice came out choked and tears were welling in her eyes as she spoke. I can't hear Hikari Nizan's voice anymore. Hinako stilled and immediately returned her attention to the screams, desperately listening for any sign of Hikari's voice. But it was impossible. Hikari's screams had completely disappeared, and that in itself was terrifying to Hinako. A feeling of dread began to well up from within her, and she desperately tried to find any means to ensure Hikari's safety. Nothing worked, and Hinako was left listening to waining screams of the little Uzumaki and the soft cries from Yumi, feeling utterly and completely helpless. Hinata was not sure what to do when she suddenly came face to face with two other girls from the academy. They were Haruno Sakura and Yamanaka Ino, a pair of cute girls who seemed quite popular amongst everyone in their class, always chatting with a group of girls or having fun playing some games. Hinata herself felt perhaps a little bit of envy for their popularity. Of course, she was incredibly embarrassed when they addressed her as Hyuga-sama, and maybe just a little incensed. Simply calling her Hyuga and not Hinata was like speaking with anyone in her clan. She felt like they were addressing to her, heiress to the clan, not to her, Hyuga Hinata, as an individual being. But of course, she was too shy to speak of that. After the rather awkward introductions, the trio had spoken much of what they wanted to have in life. Or rather, both Haruno and Yamanaka had while she mostly listened. But then, suddenly, the conversation shifted about to another person in their class, being Uchiha Sasuke. The conversation, to be rather blunt, was absolutely boring to Hinata. She did not like listening about the constant amazing qualities of the last Uchiha, especially not in the ways that the two kept pronouncing them in such loud tones. Then, her boredom and irritation turned to absolute bewilderment when the two began to fight amongst themselves, screaming at each other for even attempting to take Sasuke-kun. Clearly, they had forgotten that she was there as well. So, Hinata was left feeling absolute bewilderment when the two girls began a practical screaming contest amongst one another before huffing and walking away. It was truly an odd spectacle to observe. But watching the two of them bickering over the Uchiha allowed Hinata to remember a person who probably would have understood her more, to the point where his brash attitude would have simply told those girls to shut up for her. Messy, sun-kissed hair and bright blue eyes were what Hinata remembered clearly. The next were those cute whisker marks that adorned both sides of his face. Last, Hinata remembered the smile, so bright and full of life that it left her in awe the first time she saw it. Uzumaki Naruto, though she barely knew him, Hinata was certain that they would have been close friends. She remembered the kindness he displayed to her, how he had been there when she was crying, believing herself to be hated. She remembered his kind words and the actions he took to help make her feel better. And it is this knowledge that hurt her most. Naruto had been missing for some time now, close to a year. He was not in the usual hiding spots that he had showed her before, and even now, not even the Hokage knew of his exact locations, something that scared her. She wanted to see him again, to be able to smile and feel happiness again. Yet, the sunshine was lost along with him, and try as she might, Hinata could not truly bring much joy to herself anymore without him. It was sad to know, and even more sad to find just how much she missed his company. Yakushi Kabuto sighed with a profound sense of weariness, as he slowly made his way towards a bridge in the outskirts of their secret base. Although the experimentation had been successful and had been an absolute joy to watch, he had his limits too. 2 whole days of constant monitoring without any soldier pills or the likes to help keep him awake really left him feeling tired. Still, he cannot complain with the results. Now, Uzumaki Naruto had probably an upgrade, per se, to his condition. Though Kabuto had expressed doubts on controlling the QB container, Orochimaru had ensured that the placing of the cursed seal would override any form of disobedience that he may harbor. The only reason why Naruto was not given the cursed seal then, and there was because of his extremely unstable condition at the moment. His life is very near to an end, and though it is either him or the QB inside that keeps his body intact, there is about a 50% chance that he would not make it, despite the incredible healing factors in which he possesses. Therefore, adding the cursed seal, which already had a high mortality rate, would practically throw away any of his chances to survive, and losing a valuable specimen was something that neither Kabuto or Orochimaru really wanted to give. Kabuto was broken away from his musings as he finally reached the bridge. He paused for a moment, looking down at the portfolio in his hand, checking over its contents, before making his way to the middle of the bridge. Almost immediately, Kabuto felt something cold and long, like a snake, slither its way up his body. "You're late." A voice, flat, gruff, and cold, sounded extremely close to him, and Kabuto turned around to see who it was. His eyes widened in realization, and he immediately dropped to a bow, a sign of respect. "Please forgive me," he replied evenly. "I had to cover some of the more delicate matters of our new ward to ensure his survival." Indeed, the voice, though flat and cold, sounded like it was not very pleased at all. Trust the snake to go ahead and further his own ends instead of that of organization. "Tell me, is the QB container alive?" "For the moment." "Good. Hand over the information. I want to see what he has been doing with it." "Yes, sir." For a while, nothing was said as the figure examined the carefully detailed information on the experiments done on Uzumaki Naruto. The cloaked figure kept screening through mostly, though he made note of potential interests, before falling onto the last page and the most recent experiment done. Kabuto suddenly tensed as the air was laid thick with killing intent. His eyes widened, his body began to sweat profusely at how dense the atmosphere suddenly became. He had almost forgotten how deadly his master could be when he becomes angered. "So that snake dares try and meddle with the organization? Our leader will be most displeased with this betrayal." The figure turned his attention back to the shuddering young ninja. "As for you, when you are certain that Uzumaki's condition is stable, return him and the 2 captives back to Konoha, away from the snake." "Sir? Are you questioning me?" The air became dense once more, and Kabuto quickly shook his head in fear. He quickly bowed and acknowledged his superior. "As you wish, Sasori-sama. Come to think of it, take that little infant with them as well." That stopped Kabuto completely. The youth stared at his master, obviously in shock. He began to sputter out a way to keep the infant when suddenly, the freezing touch of that tail wrapped itself around his body, squeezing lightly, but the killing intent flared and narrowed, condensing onto his spot. Kabuto felt enough tightening in his chest to stop himself from breathing. His eyes bulged and his pores worked overtime as sweat poured out of his body like raindrops. "I will not hear another word of insubordination, or your head will be the price." When the tail was released, Kabuto gasped for air and quickly bowed before his master. He then quickly ran back to the hideout, obviously in fear of his life and determined to carry out the order. From back at the bridge, Sasori watched his puppet quickly return to the hideout, his eyes narrowing in that direction. "This is the last of your meddling former teammate," he muttered coldly. "I'll make sure that by the time I am done with you, you won't even be fit to clean my works or the dirt on my feet, you traitorous snake." Kabuto was silent as he made his way into the incubation chamber. There, sleeping without a care in the world, was his child. Her eyes were closed, and her body unmoving. The only indications that she was even alive were the small rise and falls of her chest. Kabuto stared at the baby girl emotionlessly. To him, she was nothing more than an experiment, and an enjoyable one to conceive for that matter. Still, orders from his master were absolute. Though he would not like it, he will follow it to the end. Therefore, Kabuto quickly took the child from the room, being careful to check for any monitoring devices. Yet, even his watchful eyes had missed the small garden snake that was in the corner, watching all that had happened with its yellow serpentine eyes. How long has it been already since she had been stuck inside that prison? How long has it been since she even saw the light of day? Hyuga Hinako pondered these questions as she swept her gaze in the now familiar settings. Mentally, she went over the daily routine of speaking the number, remembering the previous one from the day before. 302. That meant that she had been captured for almost a year. It also meant that it was her daughter's birthday. The Hyuga matriarch slowly swept her eyes through the room once more, landing for a moment on the unconscious Yumi next to her. There was no way out, a fact that she cursed again and again since her imprisonment. However, she felt more than just angry now, she felt furious. It was her daughter's birthday, and she could not do anything to be with her. She was powerless in the cell with those chakra bindings upon her. It had been almost a year already, almost a whole year of lamentation. Hinako could still remember the screams from the day before, not knowing at that time what was happening. Only now, to the next day, had the knowledge been bestowed upon her. Hikari, a person that she had seen as precious as her own daughter, had her Byakugan forcibly ripped from her skull. The resounding pain, coupled with the destruction of much of her body's nerves, had then killed her, but not before her screams had echoed through the entire compound. Then, as if killing Hikari in such a brutal fashion was not enough, Orochimaru then ripped out young Uzumaki's eyes as well. However, instead of letting him die as she had thought, Orochimaru implanted Hikari's eyes onto him. And so, in a twisted display of his thirst for knowledge, Orochimaru had killed a beloved person and left another to be scarred for the rest of his life. The Hyuga matriarch turned her eyes to the side, landing them on a silent Yumi. She had been quiet ever since that wretched Kabuto child had given the news. Not only had that abomination been the reason behind Hikari's crippled state, but he had also been the one to have torn the Byakugan from her still conscious form. Hinako hated him. She hated him even more than Orochimaru. How dare he harm her loved one so? How dare he fill Hikari with despair and pain while he gloated and strutted like a rooster? A soft sigh brought back Hinako from her brooding. Glancing down, she noticed that Yumi's shoulders seemed to sag a bit in weariness. No doubt, she was incredibly tired. The previous day's experience was most likely incredibly taxing on her. She needed her rest. Hinako-sama, Yumi's soft voice rang out hollow in the dark cell. "What are we going to do?" Hinako honestly did not know. What were they going to do? She had always looked for a chance, an opportunity to free them from this horrid prison. Yet, in nearly a year's worth of captivity, she had not once found a trace of lax insecurity or problems that she could have exploited. She had swept her gaze through the cell so many times that could probably recite the number of bricks placed on the walls. It was that hopeless. But of course, she must not show it. If she were to despair, then she could only imagine what Yumi would go through, Yumi, who became so incredibly insecure since they had been captured. So, she shook her head softly and spoke up in a calm tone. "We wait for our chance. They cannot be so diligent forever. When the time comes and they become more relaxed, we will strike and escape. That is the best bet that we have for now." Granted, it was really nothing more than placating her, and they both knew it. Nevertheless, Yumi gave a small smile and nodded. "And when the time comes," her voice then hardened and her eyes narrowed, "we will take our revenge for what they did to Hikari Nizan." Hinako was silent, though her eyes did narrow at the hopes of killing that abomination. Speaking of that abomination. "Oh? What's this? The two of you aren't as quiet today. What a pleasant surprise." Both Hinako and Yumi stiffened. That voice. They swept their attention to the cells, and sure enough, there stood an emotionless Kabuto, watching the two of them with apathetic eyes. Yuemi snarled in anger and hatred, stiffening against the constraints that bound her. Her eyes were wide and flaring with her dijitsu, and her ki was palpable in the air. You monster! How dare you show your face to us? How dare you face us after what you did to Hikari Nizan? If anything, Yuemi's outburst only seemed to have amused him. Kabuto shook his head, adopting an arrogant stance. You wouldn't understand. He spoke in a patronizing tone. You cannot understand the joy of furthering our kind. If there are some who are needed as sacrifice for the many, then I would gladly sacrifice them to benefit the many. But enough of this. I did not come here to speak with the undisciplined little girl. It was then that Hinako noticed two things. 1. He had a wrapped bundle in his arms. Though hidden, she had a feeling that she knew what that was. 2. He had behind him an unconscious cloaked figure. Hinako trained her eyes on the shorter figure, gauging just who it could be. She saw nothing of the face, as the hood did a very good job of obscuring anything. However, Kabuto shifted a little, just enough to move the figure, displaying 3 prominent whisker markings on either sides of his cheek. Her eyes widened. This was Uzumaki Naruto. And he looked terrible. Kabuto, seeing Hinako's gaze, smirked and pulled back the hood, just enough to reveal his face. Upon seeing it, Hinako felt horror well up within her. Naruto's face was pale, most likely due to the trauma that he had suffered, and also gaunt, indicating malnutrition. His mouth was parted, indicating that he was currently unconscious. When Hinako looked a little higher, she found that thick bandages were wrapped around his eyes, or at least, where they were supposed to be. Hinako's eyes widened in horror upon seeing a line of blood soaking the bandages, leaving a red trail through his heavily wrapped eyes. Disappointing, really? Kabuto's cold voice caught Hinako's attention. He did not flinch in the least when he felt her ki spike up. Rather, he continued speaking in that tone, acting as if he was completely bored of the child. We had hoped that the demon's chakra would have begun to accept and reconnect the nerves of her eyes. But rather, the opposite occurred. The demon is downright rejecting the eyes, thus causing pain both to the boy and possible disruption to the eyes that we had worked hard to harvest. No matter, he was the first. I'm sure that Orochimaru-sama will be able to procure a few more experiments here and there. Kabuto grinned at the desired effect. Both Hyugas tensed, wondering just what he could have meant by those words. Did he mean abducting more Hyugas, using the 2 of them, or experimenting on Hikari's child? Before either could respond to his words, the cell door opened. Hinako tensed, her whole body preparing to lash out against him. But Kabuto's smirk indicated that he already knew what they would act like. He placed a mask onto himself, covering his nose and mouth, before taking out a sprayer with some strange red liquid inside. Forgive me for being hasty, but my master wanted you 2 out post-haste. Before Hinako could speak, Kabuto sprayed the liquid into the cell, creating a fine mist that settled onto the 2 Hyugas. Because her limbs were shackled, Hinako could not cover her nose or mouth. Holding her breath only prolonged the inevitable. Soon, both her and Yuemi were forced to breath, and immediately, they felt unconsciousness seep into them. The last thing Hinako saw before she fell was the smirking face of Yakushi Kabuto. The narrowed eyes of Hyuga Hayashi were the only indications of his irritation. All around, people were arguing. Heated words were flying through the room faster than chakra-thrown kunais. It should not have been like this. The council had been gathered by the Hokage to discuss the economic situation that they had unknowingly placed upon Suna. The Wind Daimyo in charge of Sunageki's region had been more and more willing to pay for foreign shinobis, especially those of Konoha, for his work. This left Suna into a depression, with fewer funds necessary to keep a great deal of its military intact. Even worse, the Wind Daimyo went so far as to reduce his already small fundings to the village, further reducing the military size. Naturally, this led to a stream of protests, and delegates from Sunageki arrived to Konoha, complaining against their continuing dealings with the daimyo and asking for them to deny some requests. Naturally, this led to the Hokage calling a meeting to decide the fate of Suna's economy. The council, being divided between shinobi veterans and civilians, immediately declared their split views. The shinobi side, many of whom had been veterans of the Third Shinobi War, immediately spoke out their sympathy to Suna, and asking for an immediate denial against the Wind Daimyo's request. They declared that the Suna's daimyo, being only local lord and therefore a subordinate of the Wind Lord, would be forced to swallow any form of indignation, as Fire Country's military strength was at least 3 times as strong. In their views, this would have virtually no repercussions from their actions, and quite the opposite really. Once Suna's Wind Daimyo begins increasing funds to their shinobi village again, and then this would definitely improve relations between the 2 villages. Of course, their decision was not accepted at all by the civilian side. The civilian side, filled with mostly businessmen and representatives, argued that it would be beneficial to Konoha for continued business with Suna's local daimyo. They pointed out that while the daimyo would indeed be forced to swallow any insult, it did not mean that he would immediately return doing business with his village's shinobis. Rather, Suna's daimyo might instead shift his business to another village like Kumo or Iwa, both in poor relations with Konoha. Therefore, they viewed that should Konoha indeed deny the business, then Suna's daimyo would simply do business elsewhere, prompting bad relations with Suna, who will most likely blame them for simply shifting attention elsewhere. It would be a blow for Konoha then should either Iwa or Kumo, or even both, decide to ally with Suna against Konoha. The two sides began to argue. Arguments then turned heated as more than one unpleasant comment began to reverberate through the room. Soon enough, arguments gave way to full-force yelling as each side attempted to pound their reason onto the other verbally. Through this all, Hayashi bore through with his trademark apathetic expression. Yet deep down, he was also beginning to feel the traces of irritation wound up within. And how can he not? The council had not reached a clear decision after nearly 2 whole hours of constant verbal sparring. Hayashi turned his gaze over to Sandaime Hokage, seated at the highest seat, and overlooking the shouting with a relaxed, weary position. Every once in a while, he would pinch the bridge of his nose, sigh, and take a long drag from his pipe. It was times like these that Hayashi wondered just why Sandaime had allowed civilians to be in the council since the end of the Third Shinobi War. While it was true that the civilians' decisions in certain matters had allowed the village to prosper economically and therefore grow more powerful, they were hopelessly clueless in other matters, becoming incompetent in subjects that should have been easy to consider. Because the council always requires a 2/3 majority in voting, the civilian half, with their incompetence, had kept the council from performing at its usual efficiency. In fact, with the exception of Yandaime's short-term leadership, the council had reached an all-time low in efficiency since the implementing of the civilians. It was not always like this. Hayashi learned from his grandfather that under the leadership of both Shodai-sama and Nidaime-sama, the council had been composed entirely of retired and current shinobis. Though it was true that economic growth was not that strong during those times, the council of that era had finished decisions with impressive efficiency, always being able to agree on matters quickly and usually, it would be the best choice available. Now, the relative incompetence of the civilian side of the council has led us stagnant in decision-making. Arguments became more and more frequent and the Hokage, being a symbol of Konoha's authority, did nothing to stop it. Hayashi suspected that a combination of weariness and reluctance is what keeps the Hokage from doing what should be done. Sandaime-sama had been enjoying his retirement during the near 4-year reign of his successor, Yandaime-sama. However, when Yandaime-sama died, he was forced to take the mantle of leadership once more, and to make it worse, it was in Konoha's depressing state. The Kyuubi had killed many of their shinobis, many families lost their loved ones, and many lost their dreams and hopes for the future. The Hokage must have been incredibly reluctant to take the job again, and therefore, he had grown lenient, no longer as strict. He gave way to more and more strength to the opposing civilians, and they took it greedily. They took advantage of Sandaime's growing age and reluctance to fight, taking chunks of power for themselves and seeking only to benefit their individual selves, not the village as a whole. Hayashi's eyes narrowed coolly, a pair of icy orbs that stared at the Hokage with a definite hardness. At the rate things are headed, another disaster, with immense sorrow and hopelessness, would arise once more, though this time, it would stem from Konoha's own government and the level of corruption it has fallen to. Someone needs to remind old Sarutobi that the mantle of leadership is not to be taken lightly. Someone needs to remind the old monkey just what he needs to do, and once again remember just what being a Hokage means. And Hayashi already has a plan to do it. However, it seemed that it would have to wait for another time. The door to the council room suddenly busted open, silencing any arguments that had been going through. Everyone in the council, particularly Hayashi, now had their complete attention on the young Hyuga branch member, who was breathing hard, most likely having ran from a farther region. They waited patiently for him to catch his breath, and when he did, he immediately turned his gaze to meet Hayashi's in an expression of pure bewilderment. Hayashi-sama. It's Hinako-sama and Uemi-sama. They've been discovered at the eastern gates. Total silence followed the branch member's exclamation as everyone now trained their eyes on the clan head. Hayashi had a look of utter shock on his normally stoic face. Was it possible? Hinako, his beloved wife, was alive? Hayashi's eyes suddenly narrowed and a dense cloud of ki descended upon council room, causing many to shudder. I hope this is not some joke. If it is, then you will find the consequences to be most dire. I wouldn't be joking about this, Hayashi-sama. It was indeed Hinako-sama and Uemi-sama, though they were unconscious and had 2 other people with them. Who were they? The branch member hesitated, obviously feeling discomfort in the information. Yet the small spike in Hayashi's ki more than made up the decision. So one of them was Uzumaki Naruto, yet he was heavily wounded. When I swept my Byakugan over to make sure that it was him, I noticed that the heavy bandages wrapped over his eyes hid a startling secret. Uzumaki appears to have the Byakugan, though the nerves are not yet connected. The branch member immediately bowed his head at Hayashi's furious expression. I can only guess as to where he may have received them. And the other person? Sir, the other person was an infant. By the looks of it, she may only be about 2 days old. I also swept through her with the Byakugan and found that she also has it. I see. Hayashi slowly stood up and faced the silent Sarutobi. Hokage-sama, I believe this takes top priority over this meeting. If you would excuse me. Sarutobi's nod was needed as Hayashi's form disappeared in a shushin, followed quickly by the branch member. In their wake, they left a stunned and speechless council, unsure if they should pick up where they left off or join the meeting. For some reason, Hinata knew it was an off day. Though she continued the daily monotony, as always, she simply couldn't place the same amount of energy into it as she usually does. It was strange, but she simply could not find the strength today. It was as if all of her energy went elsewhere or simply decided to lie low and wait. But for what, she simply did not know. Of course, it could probably be the droning that this particular day has enacted. The weather outside was stifling, probably one of the hotter days of the years. It didn't help that the academy did not have air conditionings, which made the classroom just as hot and uncomfortable. And sadly, Irika-sensei's lectures were doing a very good job of increasing the monotony of the classroom. Now, Hinata always prided herself on being willing to learn, always listening to the lectures of past actions. It had always been interesting to her, especially on the subjects of the Sannin known as Tsunade, who helped make Konoha's medic means as effective as they are now. But not even she could stand the heat, the humidity, and Irika's lectures all at once. Therefore, she found herself zoning out along with the rest of the class. And her stray thoughts soon fell upon the blonde boy who had suddenly disappeared from her life. Uzumaki Naruto, a name that many had often spoken with hate, something she had never understood. Yet, despite what everyone thought of him, despite the many whispers that happened behind his back, he would always laugh it off, showing his bright smile and carefree nature. It was probably that carefree nature and smile that had drawn her so completely to him. She had been surprised, seeing such a person being able to ignore his peers with just as much enthusiasm as a winner in a game of tag. The surprise soon turned to admiration as she found that opposition against him came everywhere, even from teachers in the academy. To her, he was what she wanted to be, yet cannot. He was the absolute opposite to her, and it intrigued her. Only now, with him away for so long, did Hinata even take the time to look over his actions in the past and how he acted in front of those people who belittled him. And it soon clicked. Naruto, he was always forcing himself when he chose to ignore the cold stares and whispers. The smile that she had always admired when she saw it on his face had looked incredibly strained. His bright blue eyes, the windows to his soul, would always be shut off from the world, as if he cannot bear to see it. Lastly, his proclamation of becoming a Hokage also seemed different, as if he did not even believe the words coming out of his own mouth. When she noticed all of these, she immediately figured it out. Naruto's smile and act in front of those people, his seemingly indifferent nature, had all been a clever mask, made to fool people on just what he was truly feeling. And she had fallen for it, hook, line, and sinker. In fact, Hinata found that the only time his smile had even seemed natural, and so much more beautiful to see, was when he had shown her the small hiding spot that she now claimed as a sanctuary. Back then, his smile was the sun in its warmth, and now, when she compared it to his other smiles in public, she found that the warmth, despite his cheerful mask, was never there. The realization of this was not what truly horrified her. No, what scared her the most was what Naruto was really feeling. From the way that he had acted, how strained his actions had always been, he must have been trying his hardest to ignore whatever people were saying about him. That could only mean that he was hurting inside, hurting to a degree that she could not even understand. Yet, Naruto obviously did not want them to have the satisfaction of seeing him in that state, so over the years, he carefully crafted a mask, one that became better and better at hiding what he was really feeling. Once Hinata had figured that out, she felt terrible. Not only because she did not know what Naruto was truly feeling, but also because her Byakugan, the proud all-seeing bloodline of her clan, was not even able to glimpse at his true emotions. It gave her a profound sense of uselessness, that the bloodline often hailed as the most intuitive and perceptive, was not enough to crack through Naruto's mask. Or more specifically, she simply did not have the necessary strength in her Byakugan to be able to see it, another factor to demonstrate just how weak she really is. Oh, she had denied it at first, wondering just why her father and most of the clan began to call her weak or speak with her at the highest degree of coolness. Then, as the days turned to months, and the months soon began to reach a year, she found that she no longer had the will to fight their belittlement anymore. She eventually found herself acknowledging their taunts and jeers with her meek nature and bowed head. It was humiliating, but she could do nothing about it. She was that powerless. Hyuga Hinata! The young heiress broke off from her depressing daydreams with a start, returning her attention to the front of the class. There, Irika-sensei was standing there, watching her with concerned eyes, and next to him, a Hyuga branch member was keeping his eyes trained solely on her, his pupilless eyes revealing nothing. Perplexed, the little heiress got up from her seat and began to walk down the steps, all the while wondering what could have happened for her to be summoned. The moment she got down, the branch member placed a hand on her shoulder, leading her out of the classroom. Hinata hesitated, glancing over to Irika-sensei. However, the scarred man merely gave her a nod, indicating that she had his permission to leave. So, without anything to stop her, Hinata allowed herself to be led out of the room and out of the academy. As they walked out of the academy, Hinata pondered over just what could have happened. The branch member had been completely silent since leading her out, not even telling her what could have happened. She was confused. Why would they lead her out, only to leave her in the dark? Ayano Hinata felt herself wince at how soft her words came out, something that Hyugas always frown upon. This was seen by the way the branch member pursed his lips and turned a cool eye down towards her. What has happened? The branch member was silent for some time, leading Hinata to believe that he simply chose to ignore her question. Then, when she was about to lower her head back onto the road and resign herself to not knowing anything, he spoke up in a terse tone. Outside Konoha, near the outskirts of our forests, a patrol team had stumbled upon 4 unconscious people. 2 of them were identified as Hyuga Yuemi-sama and Hyuga Hinako-sama. One was an unknown Hyuga infant, and the other the branch member hesitated, as if he was about to say something before changing his mind. Was Uzumaki Naruto? Hinata's eyes widened in surprise. Her mother, she was alive. Furthermore, Naruto-kun was with her? How was this possible? The young heiress quickly returned her attention to road, now seeing that they were making their way to the hospital. Her mind was racing with questions, now seeking answers. Yet, they were all clouded with unmistakable joy. The 2 people who had been like the warmth of the sun, the 2 who left her in a seemingly eternal nightfall, were back. Kabuto was silent as he made his way back to Orochimaru's hideout. He was completely thoughtless and apathetic to what he had done. Nothing broke his barriers and nothing showed in his heart. After all, why should they? The people that he had saved were nothing more than potential test subjects. Furthermore, he was ordered by his master to save them, and orders from him were absolute. Therefore, what room was there for him to complain? No, rather, Kabuto felt like patting himself on the back for being able to leave the hideout with such discreet, especially after having to lug 4 people around. What's more, he felt like patting himself on a job well done in concealing his presence from the patrolling teams that had stumbled upon his gift. As Kabuto slipped back through the stone walls that led to Orochimaru's village, he couldn't help but wonder what his master's intentions were to sabotage Orochimaru's plans. Granted, Orochimaru was still a part of the organization known as Akatsuki. In fact, he was there 3 days ago to help in the sealing of the 4-tailed beast. Of course, Orochimaru was looking for something and using the organization to accomplish it, but wasn't the same agenda for all the other members? It was without a doubt that all the other members within Akatsuki were only there to further their own ends, so what would Sasori-sama gain from sabotaging Orochimaru's plans? Kabuto could not think of an answer, even as he stopped in front of his research room. He sighed, suddenly feeling quite tired, and opened the door, hoping for a night of rest. Unfortunately, his step was stopped by the force of the killing intent that suddenly began pounding into his skull. Kabuto gasped, suddenly falling down to his knees, as his form began to shake and sweat pour out like beads. His eyes bulged and his veins throbbed with adrenaline as his heart rate increased and his senses kicked in. Almost immediately, his survival instincts popped up, screaming at him at the intruder. There is someone in the room. He is very strong. Run. Yet Kabuto found that he could not run. His limbs were locked by the sheer force of the killing intent all around, and truth be told, he found himself hard-pressed to even be able to breathe. It was that terrifying. Well. So you've finally shown your true colors at Kabuto-kun? The young medic slowly turned his gaze into his room, seeing the dark form of Orochimaru sitting on his chair, his yellow serpentine eyes flashing like lanterns in the night. His smile was maniacal, his form simply oozing with his intention to kill, and his chakra was pouring out in cold, freezing waves. I should have known that when I accepted you into my ranks, That you were a little too skilled to have been a simply prodigy. But now, I know who you truly work for. Orochimaru stood up from the seat and walked over to the kneeling Kabuto, who was looking up at him, as if to apologize for his grave sins. Orochimaru's face broke out in a smile full of insanity and hatred as his hand shot up and grabbed onto the medic's head, squeezing it like melon. Trust that pitiful doll to concoct something like this. But no matter, I still have use for you, and whether you like it or not, I will be the one whom you call master now. And the last thing Kabuto saw and heard before his vision darkened was Orochimaru's flashing yellow eyes and his howling laugh that echoed through the entire complex. It was bright, the air was fresh and clean, unnaturally so for someone who had gotten so used to the darkness and stale air. Hanako's eyes fluttered, feeling the irritation that her now light-sensitive eyes procured. Where was she? The room was not brightly lit, probably to help people feel less irritated, but her bed was located next to the window, and sunlight poured through from the windows, bathing her white sheets in an almost ethereal glowing light. What happened? The last thing I remembered was seeing Kabuto's smile and... Kabuto! Hanako's eyes flared open, and she immediately looked all around her. Where was she? Was she in another enemy camp? If so, why would they treat her so easily? Why was she recovering in a room like this? Hanako scanned the room, hoping for any leads that could tell her just where she was. The hospital room had the familiar smell of disinfectants, though something like this should be commonplace in all hospitals. Then where could she be? Hanako felt the need to get up and try looking for any way that she could see a familiar sight. Yet, there were virtually no distinction from this hospital room and the many others that can be seen. Byakugan. Hanako's eyes flared with her active Dijutsu, her veins now bulging with increased blood flow. Almost instantly, the Hyuga matriarch winced and deactivated her eyes. The pain that had invaded her senses almost immediately after slowly began to dull, leaving a strange numb feeling on her temple. What had happened? Why did her head suddenly sprout up in pain the moment she activated her Dijutsu? Hanako shook her head to try and dispel some of the pounding against her skull. Hyuga-sama! You're awake! Hanako swiveled her head to the voice's direction, meeting a very surprised-looking nurse. The nurse quickly bowed before heading over to her, bustling over some of the medical equipments placed there. That was odd. Why would an enemy treat her with such care? Unless... Wait. Mentally, the matriarch winced at how feeble her voice sounded. It made her already soft voice into nothing but a whisper. Where is this place? Oh, that's right. You were unconscious when we found you at the outskirts of the forest. The nurse bowed a bit in acknowledgement. You are back home, Hyuga-sama. This is Kanehigakure no Sato. This was her home. Hanako winced as she tried to sit up. For some reason, her entire body was sore and every muscle protested her movements. Apparently, the nurse agreed with her muscles as in the next moment, Hanako was being fussed over again. You mustn't overextend yourself, Hyuga-sama. Your report stated that nearly all your tendons and muscles upon your limbs were slit by a chakra scalpel. While we were able to heal it, it will still take time for your body to be able to heal the rest itself. This is the village? Hanako could hardly believe. She was back home? How was it possible? Why in the world did Kabuto release them? Wait them. What about the others? The nurse jumped at the sudden tone that Hanako adopted. She sounded desperate, frantic. And for good reason. She wanted to know that everyone she had seen with her was safe as well. See, calm down, Hyuga-sama. Hyuga Uemi-sama and the unknown Hyuga are right now merely resting. As for Uzumaki, well, he is resting, but there is some concern over what certain experiments had done to his mind. He is right now under a dreamless genjutsu. Now, she was worried. Though Hanako was glad that both Uemi and Hikari's child are safe, the unknown condition on little Naruto was a cause for concern. Who knows how much he was actually suffering? Still, at the very least, he is now away from the serpent's lair and in the safety of Konoha. Ayano Hyuga-sama. The matriarch returned her attention to the nurse, who was fidgeting a little. She waited patiently for the nurse to regain her composure, something that she was grateful for. Ano Hyuga Hayashi-sama is currently waiting outside. Would you like to see him? Hanako's eyes widened. Hayashi-sama was here? Hanako felt an incredible sense of longing suddenly take over her being. How long has it been since she had seen her beloved husband's face? How long has it been since she had felt the warmth of his touch and the peacefulness of his presence? Far too long, she decided. He had been gone from her for far too long, and she wasn't going to waste another second of it. Yes, she responded quietly. Please bring him in. The nurse bowed to her and walked over to the edge of the door. When she opened it, she gave a nod to whoever was waiting before walking away. The person slowly walked in, and Hinako felt tears well up in her eyes when she met the gaze of her husband, Hyuga Hayashi. Hayashi-sama, a watery smile bloomed on her face as the tears slowly poured out of her eyes. I missed you. I miss you as well. Hayashi's normally emotionless facade broke as relief flooded his system. He walked over to his long-lost wife and, without caring for anyone watching, embraced her. I missed you so much. She closed her eyes, relishing in the warmth that he gave off. This is what it should be like, she decided. To be able to feel his warmth, his presence, and his love. It was like a light in the end of a dark, dark tunnel. Hayashi-sama. Hayashi whispered to her as he stroked her back gently. It's fine now. You're home. Home. Hinako gave a small smile at that. After nearly a year of separation, home sounded amazing to her. She slowly buried her head deeper into his embrace. She wanted to know that this was not a dream, a hallucination. She wanted to see this as real. And mother? Hinako stiffened almost immediately. How long has it been since she heard that soft voice? Far too long. She slowly turned away from her husband and met the wide-eyed figure of her daughter, Hyuga Hinata. Oh, she had changed so much in the past 9 months. She had grown a bit taller, she now had a different set of clothes, and if anything, she seemed more reserved. Oh, how she missed her. Hinako slowly pulled away from Hayashi's embrace, not noticing that he had stiffened the moment Hinata made her arrival. Hinata, she could hardly believe it. Her little daughter had grown so different in the 9 months that she had been separated. It was so strange. But she was still her daughter, and the love that she felt for her had never diminished. With a smile, she held out her arms open. Come here. Come here, little Hinata. Recognition flashed through Hinata's pale lavender eyes, yet she hesitated in moving over, something that confused Hinako. Then, she noticed that every once in a while, Hinata's fidgeting would give way as her gaze would switch from her to Hayashi. Then, she would immediately look back down and fidget once more. Now, Hinako was not a stupid person. In fact, she is one of the more knowledgeable ones in the field of medical studies. Therefore, she could immediately detect signs of abuse and neglect on her daughter, especially when she was making it so obvious. That, along with the fact that she kept skirting gazes onto Hayashi, could only mean that her husband was at least part of the cause. And that in itself was enough for her stiffen. Whatever love and warmth she had for her husband suddenly cooled down and hardened. Her eyes narrowed as she turned her gaze from her scared daughter and towards her husband, who would not meet her gaze. Hinata, the little girl, looked up as her mother spoke up her name. Please go outside for a moment. I would like to have a talk with your father. Hinata gave another small glance to her father, who still would not meet her gaze, and gave a small nod. Why, yes, mother. Hinata slowly closed the door behind her and walked away. She was still partially in shock over the revelation that had come. Her mother was alive. She was not dead like how she was led to believe. But then, that piece of happy information also came with a darker question. Where had her mother been in the past 9 months? Why had she suddenly disappeared? More importantly, why was her disappearance also linked with Naruto's? Naruto. Hinata suddenly stopped. Her eyes widened in shock as she realized what had happened. In her worry and bewilderment over her mother's return, she had completely forgotten about Naruto. A new sense of urgency suddenly took over her as she quickly made her way to the receptionist's office. The nurse in charge looked up, took one look at Hinata, and nodded her head back where she came from. Hyuga Hinako and Hyuga Uemi are in that area. If you are looking for them, I'll simply call their room and ask them for permission. Is that all right? Ayano. Hinata found that she was fidgeting terribly. The look of surprise on the nurse's face at her outburst was more than enough to almost kill the resolve that she had built up. She felt so incredibly embarrassed at that moment that she wished a hole in the ground would just suddenly open up and have her fall in. But she wanted to see Naruto again. So, she continued speaking, in a more subdued tone. It's just that I want to see Uzumaki Naruto. She closed her eyes and mentally prayed for the nurse to accept that. Seconds passed and Hinata's anxiousness grew. Finally, she slowly peeked open her eyes, wondering just why the nurse was so silent. To her surprise, the nurse was simply looking over a number of files, as if she had not even heard her. Hinata's embarrassment flared as her face became beet red. Ayano. Ah, here it is. The nurse gave a relieved smile as she pulled out a portfolio from a rather large stack. She scanned through it for a bit before stopping her finger on a name. Uzumaki Naruto is at room 304. Simply take the stairs up and it'll be the first room on the right. The nurse looked up, and felt confusion well up in her at the sight of the little Hyuga girl looking so incredibly flustered. Was something wrong? Meanwhile, Hinata was mentally berating herself. How stupid could she have been? The nurse was simply looking for his location just as she asked. Yet she thought that her words went unnoticed and was about to bother her even more. Oh, how could she have been so short-sighted? "On a little miss?" Hinata jumped and quickly returned her attention to the nurse before her, who had suddenly leaned forward from her seat and placed a hand on her forehead. "Do you need to have treatment as well? Your face is quite red and warm." If anything, Hinata's blush of embarrassment grew even redder. She quickly ducked down her head and murmured a quiet thanks before quickly walking away from the nurse. Oh, she felt so embarrassed. As she went up the stairs that led to Naruto's room, Hinata couldn't help but think of what she should be saying. What was she to say? It had been almost a year since she had seen him, and even then, he had been masking away his sadness in that happy carefree mask. Would he hide behind it again when she sees him? Would she be able to muster the courage to help him? More than anything since her revelation, Hinata had wanted to see Naruto again, to be able to hug him and tell him that it's okay to cry, that it was okay to not hide behind that mask. More than anything, she wanted to tell him that she would be there for him, that he was not alone. Finally, Hinata stopped in front of Naruto's door, yet, almost immediately, she felt hesitation well up in her. She knew what to say to him, but she was so scared. For all she knew, he could take offense at the fact that she was able to see the mask that, from what she could tell, almost no one had been able to look through. She slowly took a deep breath, closing her eyes and steeling her resolve, to finally be able to meet him again. Hinata quietly released her breath and with her heart set, slowly opened the door. And was met with absolute silence. Whatever words that she had prepared to use to help him had immediately died in her throat. Hinata could only watch in absolute horror at what laid before her. This was not the same Naruto that she had been able to glimpse back those many months ago. The young blonde laid quietly, apparently asleep, in a large white bed. Yet those white sheets were marred with intricate seals that stretched all the way towards the ceiling. Along those seals, machines were placed all around with tubes that seemed to stick into his hidden body. Finally, his eyes were hidden away behind thick white bandages. Yet even the thickness gave way to 2 large red spots and the thin line's red stain. Hinata was horrified at the sight. It was as if his eyes were constantly crying blood. Hinata slowly made her way over towards the unconscious blonde, being careful as to not step on any of the seals. When she finally found herself next to his bedside, she glanced at the empty seat before her. Without a moment's hesitation, she immediately took it and now found herself meeting his blind self. Naruto-kun. Hinata was sad. How was she not otherwise? Naruto looked so miserable in this place. The very air felt heavy, as if someone's anguish was so evident that it could be felt as an aura. Still, he was back. At the very least, he was back. It's been almost a year now, Naruto-kun. Do you remember me? Hinata? There was no response, though she supposed that she could not expect one. So much has happened in the 9 months that you've been gone. I found that mother had disappeared along with Hikari Nizan and Yuami Nizan. No one would tell me what happened but told me to never think about them again. I eventually joined the academy. Everyone is so scary, and also there are some that make me mad. Hinata suddenly gave a small smile. I'm sorry, I suppose I cannot badmouth anyone right now when they aren't here. It's rude, is it not? Naruto-kun, do you remember when we first met? I was made of by some girls and ran away, crying. I wanted to be alone, to be by myself. Then you came. Your smile was so bright that I was surprised to see it. I wondered then, why would someone I don't know suddenly come out of nowhere and talk to me? Naruto-kun, you were my first real friend. I'm so sorry. Back then, you comforted me, yet I didn't know that you yourself was just like me. Hinata hiccuped softly as tears welled up in her eyes. She quickly covered her eyes with both hands, as to not show him her tears. It's okay, Naruto-kun. I'll try harder now. You don't have to be alone anymore. And it stayed like for a while. Hinata would simply talk a bit but it would soon descend into silence. In this period of quietness, she would simply watch Naruto's face, emotionless and nearly featureless with the large bandages. She wanted to hold on to him, yet the fear of her touch setting off something always held her back, so she stayed like that, simply watching him, hoping that he would recover. Finally, after what appeared to have been an eternity in their own world, the door opened, and in stepped a medic. Upon seeing the medic, Hinata quickly stood up and murmured an apology. Without even bothering to explain herself, she quickly ran off, her face red from embarrassment and a smaller mixture of different emotions. As the medic watched her run off, he shook his head. Kids, he muttered. Well, nothing I can do about that, I suppose. Now let's see. He returned his attention to the unconscious blonde and went through a quick series of hand seals. His hand soon began to glow a bright green as he performed a diagnostic checkup on the boy. Body wounds are healing at expected rapid pace. Genjutsu effect still in place. Chakra coils are performing normally. Wait, what's this? The medic stopped as his glowing hand was hovering over the large bandages. His eyes widened in surprise at what the medical sonar had detected, and immediately, he tapped the earpiece and spoke quickly. Get Hokage-sama in here, now! Old Sarutobi, the Sandaime Hokage of Konohagakure, could not help but stare at the medic. The words that he had just heard, could they even be possible? Please repeat what you said. Sir Uzumaki Naruto's eyes were torn off of his body, that much is true. It is also true that the Byakugan of Hyuga Hikari had been implanted in its place, yet from what we had gathered when we first performed the diagnostic, his body had been rejecting the Byakugan. That would have explained the deterioration of the eyes. It also would have explained the inflammatory response and the blood that kept leaking out. Yet now, after performing the diagnostic again, I found that the Byakugan is actually completely transformed. And this is the cause of the Kyuubi's yoki? That can reason, though the effects of the Shiki Fuijin may have been acting on it too. The chakra that the Yondaime left behind in the seal had seeped a little into the eye sockets as well. From what I was able to glean, the Byakugan had been constantly deteriorating under the effect of the combined chakras. Then, the Kyuubi's yoki began to rebuild the eyes. By the time I checked, the nerves that connected the eyes into the brain had already been healed and connected. Sarutobi was silent as he mulled over the information in his head. So the eyes had now become Naruto's. If anything, this would be a great asset to the boy. Sarutobi had no doubts that it would serve to protect him in the future. Yet what were the consequences? For all he knew, the influence of the Kyuubi's yoki and the connection of the nerves could also have influenced the boy's mind. What would happen to him then? What are the chances that the Kyuubi's yoki would be able to affect Naruto's mentality? The medic slowly closed his eyes and ran through a more thorough diagnostic on Naruto's body. He placed one glowing hand on top of the seal placed on the boy's navel. The other hovered over Naruto's head. For a few minutes, the medic kept still as the information slowly came to light. Eventually, he relaxed and shook his head to the Hokage. It is all right. The seal is still functioning properly. The barest minimum is being filtered out and in turn, purified for Naruto's own use. Sarutobi sighed with relief. So his successor's final technique still proves to be working. That is good. At the very least, he did not have to worry too much about the Kyuubi breaking the seal. Naruto had suffered enough without having to have his soul consumed by the fox demon. And at the very least, there won't be another reason for the villagers to attack him. Sarutobi shook his head to rid himself of the depressing thoughts. He returned his attention to the medic and nodded to him as he made his way for the door. Please keep a careful watch over Naruto-kun. The medic gave Sarutobi a respectful bow as the old man left. The door closed quietly and neither saw the twitch Naruto's finger gave nor the slighty glow of the Genjutsu seal. In the years that he had been the Hokage, Sarutobi felt that one of his greatest pride had been the creation of this medical hospital. Back in those days, when war had been as normal as drinking water, his village had suffered so many losses. Despite its large population, the village was sending children into battle and most of the time, many promising futures were wiped out in a single second. Tsunade, the granddaughter of Shodai-sama and his former student, was one of those who had lost a person dear to them. However, she used that loss to aid her passion in healing. It was to this extent that she, with her own money both inherited and earned, created Konoha's medical center. In it, she had enforced strict teachings and discipline. It was supposedly such a rigorous training course that those that had the mental discipline of at least a seasoned chunin were expected to survive in it. Yet the results were amazing. Out of Tsunade's original hand-picked group of students, tens of medic neens, all of whom had discipline rivaling even those of A and B, were created. Eventually, medic neens grew in such prominence throughout the warring years that most of the medic neen leaders were treated as if they were jounins themselves. Even now, in these relatively peaceful years, those that failed the genin exam yet still want to continue the path of the shinobi often picks the course of a combat medic. Medics in the field of combat were already given the authority and payment of a chunin, and the medic leaders were treated as the elite, the jounins. Still, what made him so proud was not the skills of the medics. Though it had saved countless lives, the skill of a medic is useless without the necessary compassion of one. It is here that Tsunade literally pounded into her former students. Sometimes, she even resorted into genjutsu to test the students, seeing if her students would refrain from healing anyone. Those that failed, even if they had the skills, were immediately expelled and told to never pursue the course of a medic neen again. Her students, now seasoned medical shinobis themselves, carry on her will in this medical center. They use intimidation, genjutsu, and other techniques not unlike those of the interrogation squads, all in the name of literally beating out the prejudice of any applicant in the medical field. Though Sarutobi had his doubts on the techniques used for the applicants, he cannot skirt out the results before him. The medics heal anyone injured, even the enemies, even the village pariah. Sarutobi sighed, and glanced at the building around him, a grand complex that features the greatest of medical science and techniques accumulated. It was his greatest regret that his student was not here to see her original group of 7 students has now expanded to become one of the greatest groups of medics both in terms of skill and in terms of liberalness. The old Hokage stopped as he stood in front of Hyuga Hinako's room. He could hear the voices in the room, screams of anger that he had not heard in a long time. It would seem that Hyuga Hinako was very pissed. Sarutobi felt sweat appear out of his pores as he tipped his Hokage hat downwards to hide his sudden fearful expression. Perhaps it would be best to leave this to later. He had learned long ago that the saying of Makai hath no scorn like a woman's fury to have been all too true, especially after encountering his other student, Jiraiya's many beatings for being caught peeping women in bathhouses. Ugh, perhaps it would be best to wait until she calms down. Sarutobi definitely remembered Hinako in her younger years. She was shy, much like her daughter. Yet, when she becomes angry, and that means really angry, then he could only pray for whoever instigated her anger to receive a quick and painless death. She was that scary. Did he just thought scary? Hokage-sama, is there something I can help you with? Sarutobi jumped in surprise at hearing the voice of Hyuga Hayashi coming from the door. He slowly turned his gaze towards the door, and met the man revered as the one that can sit in a field of fire and still have that apathetic expression, with a complete look of desperation in his eyes. And no, I was just thinking of asking Hinako-chan a few things, but it would seem that at this moment, she is busy. So, I will take my leave. No, I'm sure that she will be eager to know what you would like to say. Sarutobi cursed the man before him. Hayashi was now smiling. The gleam in his pale eyes literally screamed, if I'm going to take that hell, I'll at least let you have some of it too. Oh, I must insist. As Hayashi tugged the old Hokage into the room, Sarutobi secretly prayed that she would not kill him as well. When he slowly opened his eyes, he was met with a red-faced Hyuga Hinako, who was breathing rather deeply. Upon seeing the Sandaime Hokage in the room, Hinako quickly composed herself as best as she could. Yet, Sarutobi could see the glare that she sent point-blank into Hayashi. It clearly said, this isn't over, you're so getting it when I'm better. Hayashi could only nod his head slowly, obviously resigned to his fate. Hokage-sama. Is there something that you wanted from me? Despite himself, Sarutobi could not help but give a soft chuckle. My, it has been a while since I've seen your face, Hinako-chan. Can't you let an old man have the luxury of seeing one of his beloved children again? Hinako looked down, yet both men could see the small pleased smile that had blossomed on her face. After a period of silence, Hinako gave out a quiet murmur. Yes, I'm finally home again. And it is true that I have not come just to see you. Sarutobi dropped all attempts he thought of to mull the situation over to the conversation that he had planned. He'll simply go straight and blunt. I want to know what has been done to Naruto-kun. Hinako looked up in surprise. She had not expected him to want the answers so quickly, though she couldn't blame him. She would have wanted to answer too if she had been Hokage. I don't know everything that has been done to Naruto-kun. The only real experiment that I had laid eyes on had been Orochimaru's attempt to create a technique where a person can stay at a constantly young age. An immortal technique, if you will. From what I was able to see and hear, the technique had done the exact opposite, and by the time they had managed to draw it back, Naruto-kun had already aged by a whole year. I see, that was disturbing to know. If Orochimaru had discovered a technique to age a being faster, then he could probably create an army as large as Fire Country's own samurai legions in a year, maybe even less if he were to really work through it. Ayano Hokage-sama. Sarutobi quickly returned his attention to Hinako, who now looked at him with resolution clearly printed in her features. Sarutobi felt nostalgia well up in him. It had truly been a long time since he had seen Hinako with that expression on her face. Yes, what is it? Regarding the matter of Uzumaki Naruto. I would like to adopt him into the Hyuga clan. Where am I? Where am I? Where am I? Ouch, my body, it hurts. Cold, so cold. Where am I? Wake up, little one. You are not dead. Wake up. Who are you? Wake up. Uzumaki Naruto slowly stirred, his body giving way to movement. Almost immediately, he noticed that he could see nothing, that whatever was covering his eyes was wet with some type of liquid. He also noted a major difference to how he normally felt upon waking up. His body was not restrained. Strange. He never felt a day pass by where that bastard Kabuto would not restrain him. Why was today so special? Wait, what had happened before? He remembered something. Yes, it was feeling of indescribable pain. Naruto slowly closed his hidden eyes as he tried to remember just what it was that made his sockets ache with a painful memory. Flashback. He was led to a room filled with blood. All around, the symbols of inhuman cruelty was so prominent that he felt like throwing up, even though he had witnessed these things before. Suddenly, he was forced onto a bed and strapped in place once more. He struggled, of course, but as always, he was not able to be free. Today we have a special treat for you, Naruto-kun. He turned his head towards that sickening serpent voice and found himself meeting those yellow reptilian eyes of Orochimaru. The pale-faced man grinned and held up a jar. Inside, a pair of pupilless eyes stared back at him. Naruto felt his own eyes widen in horror. Wait, where had he seen those before? Naruto stiffened at the sounds of a metal table being carted away. He slowly turned his head towards the door and saw Kabuto carting away an unmoving body. Naruto only had that small moment to glimpse it, yet it was enough. That person, one of those older Naisans that he had seen from before, she was unmoving. Her face was set in an expression of anguish and pain. Her sockets were empty and bloody. Now don't worry. This won't hurt one bit. Naruto only managed to see Orochimaru in front of him, with a steel scalpel before his world erupted into red and pain. End flashback. Naruto gasped as he clutched the sheets tightly with clenched fists. His whole being felt sick with the knowledge. He had her eyes. Naruto slowly brought his hand up to feel the tightly wrapped bandages. To think, underneath those bandages were the eyes of someone else. It's all his fault. Naruto gritted his teeth in anger and resentment towards that man. If he wasn't there, then this would never have happened. Yes, I suppose that it is indeed mostly that man's fault, isn't it? He immediately jumped in surprise. Naruto had not even heard a single footstep. He tensed his body in preparation for running away, no matter where it would take him. Who are you? Oh, just an old friend. From the grisliness in his tone and the familiarity in talking, Naruto could safely say that whoever this person is, he's old, and he must have known him at some point. Not like that really made an impression on him. Naruto frowned and gripped his bandages, annoyed at the fact that he couldn't see and still feeling sick with the fact that the pair of eyes in his sockets were not his own. How was that possible anyways? How is it that someone's eyes can just replace his own, and he would be able to see with them? Wait, can he even see with these? Anxiety soon welled up as he quickly began clawing at his bandages. Would he even be able to see? If he couldn't, then what? Would they go and tear off these eyes as well and replace them with another pair? Calm down, it's alright. Apparently, the old man managed to see his anxiety and fear quite quickly. Naruto-kun, you need not worry about your eyes. The medics have told me that there will be no problem with your sight should you let them heal over time. Naruto ignored the man and after finding the end of the bandage, quickly began unwrapping it. He stubbornly ignored the stranger's protest as he continued to unwrap his bandages with vigor. He had to know. Was he going to see or not? Would he be blind? Would his new eyes make him look more like a freak? Finally, when the last of the bandages fell off, he brought his hands up and slowly rubbed his closed eyes. At that moment, fear and uncertainty was high. He didn't know if he would be blind or not, but if he were able to see, what would he see? Especially with the eyes of a person he saw being carted away like a sack of meat. No, his eyelids twitched and slowly began parting. For now, I'll listen to this guy. I want to see. I want to see. Naruto fully opened his eyes and immediately squinted at the whiteness the room gave off. Slowly, colors began to blend with the whiteness. Blurry outlines soon became visible, yet to his chagrin, he found that he truly could not see clear shapes yet. Everything was one big blur. Now you must learn some patience, Naruto-kun. Sometimes being too impulsive can lead to harsh consequences. Naruto stopped and turned his head towards the direction of the voice. The only thing he could make out in the blur was a mass of red and white. He slowly squinted his eyes, trying to focus more. Eventually, he slowly became able to see a slightly more defined shape. The red on the head so took a more hat-like quality, and he could barely make out a thin black thing that was sticking out of this person's mouth. Naruto felt his eyes widened. It shouldn't be possible. Jeiji-chan? Sarutobi smiled and walked over to the incredibly vulnerable-looking boy. He fell down to his knees, bringing himself to eye level with him, and immediately wrapped his arms around the boy. He slowly rubbed his hand over to boy's head as a sense of joy welled up in him. Naruto remembered him. Even after all the trauma he had been inflicted with, he still remembers him. It's been a long time now, hasn't it, Naruto-kun? Naruto was shocked. How was he here? Hokage Jiji, the only adult who had looked at him with no hatred in his eyes. He was the only adult that Naruto had ever wanted. He was like the grandfather that he had never known. Seeing him now again, even though he was blurred, it was almost too much to bear. Where am I? It's alright now, Naruto-kun. You're home now. You're safe. Home? What is this home that Jiji was talking about? For his part, Naruto didn't want to ask. He never felt at home in the village. He was always beaten, called names, and given cheap products for extremely high prices. It took extremely careful spending with his monthly stipend to scrape by. No, he had never considered the village a home. It was a shelter at best and a prison at worst. Yet now that he's away from that snake and his painful experiments, he'd take this village any day. Naruto closed his eyes and buried his head into the Hokage's shoulder. He'll stay, if only for Jiji. Now, Naruto-kun. I'm sure that this will come as a surprise to you, but please bear with me. Now that perked his attention. Naruto pulled away from the old Hokage and slowly nodded. He had yet to remember a time where Jiji had ever lied to him, and by the tone of his voice, this seems to be a rather important matter. Well, Naruto-kun, do you remember what I have taught to you about clans and families? Naruto slowly nodded his head. He vaguely remembered the lessons that Jiji had decided to give him about some important families in the village. Now that he thought about it, the two that stood out had been called Hyuga and Uchiha. He didn't remember why, but something that the Hokage had said seemed to have made those two stick to his head more than the others. There were two important families called Hyuga and Uchiha. I don't really remember why they were so important though. It's good enough. Sarutobi smiled. He couldn't expect much from Naruto after all. The boy had been 4 when he decided to teach him, and the boy listened mostly just for memorization's purpose, and given the years and trauma that followed, he doubted that he would remember. Now one of those families, the Hyuga clan, has decided to formally adopt you. Now that was a shocker. What in the world would an important family want with him? Naruto highly doubted that he was special. In fact, the villagers had more than once expressed their views on just how special he actually was. Why, then, would a clan that Jiji had explicitly spoke of in importance would suddenly decide to adopt him? As if reading his mind, Sarutobi spoke up once more. This time, his voice was tinged with sadness. The Hyuga clan had lost 3 important people to them. Hyuga Hinako, the matriarch of the clan, along with Hyuga Hikari and Hyuga Uemi, both members of the main house, were abducted the same night as you by Orochimaru. I'm sure you remember them now. Oh, Naruto did remember them. They were probably the 2 prisoners he had met in a fleeting glance when he was being moved to another room. The older Neisan had probably been that Hinako person. The other one was probably Uemi or Hikari. Then where was the other one? Her face was set in an expression of anguish and pain. Her sockets were empty and bloody. Naruto's eyes flared open, and he immediately pushed himself away from Sarutobi. The Hokage was just about to ask what was wrong when suddenly, Naruto hunched over and threw up whatever contents his stomach had. Sarutobi was upon him in an instant, patting the boy's back as gently as possible as Naruto continued to regurgitate his stomach contents. Finally, when he was done, Naruto just stayed there, his body shaking horribly at what he had just learned. I have her eyes, one of those Neisans. Naruto slowly brought up his hands to cover the eyes. His whole being felt sick, so incredibly sick. To think, they once belonged to someone else, someone who he had seen being carted away like spoiled meat. He felt like an abomination. No, that was too good for him. He felt like a freak. Is that why they want to adopt me? Because I now have the same eyes as them? Sarutobi frowned at the resigned tone that the boy had. Granted, the information must have been a shock to him, but to suddenly assume that he would be adopted only because of similarities was what one would expect from hopelessness. Naruto shouldn't have that. He deserved better. Naruto. They don't want you simply because of that reason. The matriarch of the clan is Hyuga Hinako, one of those who had been taken by Orochimaru the same night as you. She told me that while she had not seen a lot of the experiments, she had seen enough to be disgusted. She wants to protect you. Simple as that. So one of the Neisans was actually a matriarch? If anything, that made Naruto all the more skeptical. However, he refrained from speaking. Too many things were going through his head, and he certainly did not want to become even more confused than he already was. For a while, neither of them spoke a word. Sarutobi was worried over the mental health of the young boy beside him and wondering if he could even find acceptance in the clan that brands its branch members in a sign of forever servitude. The clan, while it had suffered some of the lightest of casualties, had been completely neutral in proposing the state of Naruto after they had found out on him becoming a demon container. For the most part, the clan had declined to put in an opinion, making it hard to gauge just what their stance in the matter was. It did not matter if Hinako wanted to adopt Naruto into the clan. If the clan itself objected to the idea, then there can be nothing done for him. Though I suppose if Hinako can persuade Hayashi in the matter, there shouldn't be much trouble. Hayashi was perhaps the most persuasive speaker in the council, and that quite literally meant that he was the most persuasive speaker in the whole village. If he were to side with Naruto's adoption into the clan, then the boy's chances would rise significantly. Sarutobi had an inkling that Hayashi would do it too. The man looked incredibly whipped when he saw him with Hinako the day before. Sarutobi could almost shake his head at how strange it was. Hyuga Hayashi, probably the most powerful and influential member of the council, was whipped by his wife, who had always been known as a shy but loving matriarch in the clan. If he hadn't been so old already and seen many things, he felt that he would have had to bend down and pick up his jaw that had landed onto the ground. Would Naruto like it though? He lowered his gaze onto the young boy before him. Even if he were to be adopted into the Hyuga clan, there is a chance that they would simply look down onto him like the rest of the villagers. The clan could act like the villages, abiding the clan rules in face of its leaders, but dissent and lash out on the boy when no one's looking. In the worst-case scenario, he could be branded with the curse seal, leaving him in the mercy of the Hyugas. Naruto, for his part, was wary with being adopted. From his early years being in the orphanage, he had remembered the faces of people when they adopted the other orphans. When they had looked at him, they sneered at him, as if he was some type of trash for them to step on. The old caretaker was nice enough, but when he died, his replacement filled in, and that woman absolutely no qualms with making his life a living hell. He had never trusted an adult outside of the old Hokage since. What difference would it make if the Hyuga would adopt him? For all he knew, the clan would be just as bad as that caretaker from before. They could be even worse. Now if you have calmed down enough, Hinako-san had wanted to see you. Do you want to come and meet her? Did he want to go and meet the woman who would eventually be his caretaker? Though he was still skeptical of the idea, it wasn't entirely a bad thing for him. Who knows? Maybe she actually liked him instead of hated him. All right. Naruto slowly hopped off of the bed before making his way over to the door, nearly banging on a few furnitures in the process. He squinted his eyes yet still could barely make out a few blurry shapes and colors. It was annoying. It was so incredibly annoying that he could not see a damn thing. If he had his eyes, if he had his old eyes, he would have had no troubles moving around. Naruto grimaced when his knee unexpectedly bumped into a metal post. It certainly didn't help that he barely even knew where the door was. He felt like an idiot walking around in circles and bumping into things along the way. Here, Naruto-kun, a hand was placed on his shoulder, and the boy soon found himself being steered into another direction. I think it would be better if I were to lead. Naruto would have to agree. Hinako had her eyes closed as she gently hummed a little tune that she had picked up in her youth. At that moment, it was very peaceful in her recuperating chamber. The sunlight shone through the open windows, illuminating her room with an almost healing glow. Yet the breeze that swept in was nice and cool, a temperature that she had came to love from the village. Outside, the birds were chirping quietly amongst themselves in an almost harmonious pitch, and just barely within reach of her hearing, the bustling of human activities swept through, indicating that this village was alive, prosperous, and everyone was working hard. It was so incredibly peaceful to her if she were to ignore the silent statue that was her husband. Hinako's soft smile dropped at this, and her humming soon stopped as well. What was she to think about with her husband? She loved him dearly, there was no doubt about that. After all, both Hinata and Hanabi were proof of her love and devotion towards her husband. Yet, was the Hayashi that she had known all along just a mask that he wore on her? His treatment on little Hinata, a daughter that she cherished for her sweetness, was something so horrible that were he anyone else, she would have attempted a juken strike right to their heart. Was this Hayashi the true one that she married? The beast behind the mask? She could still remember the day she had married the man before her. Back then, she was a promising medic nin, reaching a chunin-worthy rank within its own hierarchy at the age of 15. A year into her work, she was suddenly told by the main family that she was to be betrothed to Hyuga Hayashi, and the birdcage seal on her forehead was to be removed immediately. That had been one of the greatest moments of her life. Despite the animosity that the branch section had for the main branch members, she had always been smitten with Hyuga Hayashi, though she would be the first to admit that her attraction to his twin, Hyuga Hizashi, was almost as strong, if only because they were identical in appearance. To her, Hayashi had been one of the more kinder main branch members that she had seen, and after the one moment, when he had caught her after she had fallen off of a tree at the age of 10, she felt that her heart had been stolen by him since. To suddenly find out that he would be her betrothed, it was almost too good to be true. But it was not. It was all true. At the age of 16, she was married to the then 28-year-old Hayashi. Despite the age difference between them, she felt that she was able to give her heart to the man and believed that he would return to those feelings as well. It worked out beautifully. When she had declared her love for him, even after finding out of her betrothal to him, he returned those feelings to her, and the two of them managed to turn the marriage into one of love instead of one for maintaining blood purity. Soon after they had consummated their marriage, she learned that she became pregnant with their child. Despite the calm facade that he kept up, she was quick to see that the man was ecstatic. During quiet nights when it was just the two of them sleeping together, he would hover his hand over her stomach, and she would catch the fleeting moments of a very warm smile. It had been moments like those that she felt most at peace, and she would snuggle into her beloved husband, burying her head into the crook of his neck. It was during those times that she felt that nothing in the world mattered aside from her husband and the growing child that was within her. When little Hinata had been born, she felt that the culmination of their love had finally borne fruit. Their young daughter was so beautiful, so completely beautiful that at first glance, she wanted nothing more than to cradle her forever. Likewise, Hayashi had coddled onto their firstborn for months, to the point where he would come home from meetings literally panting for breath. At times, Hayashi's branch member escort would tell her of how he would sit through meetings, watching the time and simply drumming his fingers. At the first note of adjournment, he would be the first to leave, and do so in a brusque manner. That had probably been as amusing as it was endearing. If anything, the love she had for him only grew. Then, for years after Hinata's birth, she became pregnant again. For many normal citizens, they actually thought that that was her first pregnancy, since she was barely at the age of 21. Hinako did not bother to correct them at all, as she was once more descended into the joys of a pregnant mother. Hayashi had fussed over her even more than her first pregnancy, and if anything, his mask cracked much more than during the first one. Hinako had always found that adoration in him and the worry he had for health much more palpable to see. And then, after she had given birth to Hanabi, she had been taken away. For 9 whole months she had been forced to endure many heartaches, always unable to move as the screams of little Uzumaki echoed throughout the hallways. She had been forced to sit and do nothing as a person who she viewed as another daughter was raped by that treacherous Kabuto and forced to bear his child. She was made to be helpless as she heard the final dying screams of Hikari and watched as Kabuto dragged an unconscious Uzumaki, with his new eyes bandaged up and bleeding. Hinako felt that those torturous days would have dragged on forever. Yet by some stroke of luck, or for the amusement of that snake Medicnine, she was released with her other daughter figure, Uemi, the young Uzumaki, and the infant child that was Hikari's legacy. When she awoke once more, she found herself back in the care of her home, and soon, she was reunited with her dear husband, Hayashi. Yet how could he have done it? When she had seen Hinata fidgeting, literally shaking with fear, and how her husband would not meet her eyes, she immediately knew that her precious child, their precious child, had been mistreated by none other than him. Why? Why in the world would he do such a thing? When she confronted him on this, he would not answer. Her anger was then made vocal, yet all he did was bow his head and take the verbal lashing that she gave him. That certainly didn't satisfy her. She wanted to know why, not see him take her attacks as if everything will be the same after. Then, she came up with an idea. She wanted to test her husband's actual discipline and self-pride. So, she decided that when the Hokage would meet with her, she would immediately request that she would adopt little Uzumaki. When this had happened, it naturally gave Hayashi a surprise. Her husband certainly wasn't expecting that, and she felt satisfied with that knowledge. If he were indeed acting as a mask this whole time, treating them only through that mask, then she would know. Little Uzumaki wasn't going to be adopted by the Hyuga clan. He is going to be adopted by her family, making him a member of the household. She'll be there to monitor her husband's behavior, to ensure that he would treat the village pariah with little difference to how he treats his daughters. Of course, she didn't decide to adopt Uzumaki simply because she wanted to keep her husband in a short leash. The boy had suffered, more so than most orphans or even black sheep should. Her heart sang with pain every time she had heard his screams, and whenever she was able to see him, she had silently begged him for forgiveness that she was too powerless to help him. Now, with a wall around his heart, he could very well transform into the being that the villagers fear him to be. What scared Hinako the most is what will happen to that little boy who 3 years ago had declared to her that he would beat up all the big bad bullies for Nei-san. Despite the sorrow she felt for him, Hinako still managed a small smile. That particular memory had been one of her fondest regarding the boy who was once a ball of perpetual energy. She had been walking through the forests, admiring the tranquility that it provided her that day, when she had stumbled across a small creek. It was a small spot, almost completely hidden by rocks and trees, yet it sparkled with a clarity that left her astonished. It was almost a river of pureness that she had not been able to see since. All of a sudden, when she had bent down to scoop up the crystal clear water, the bushes shook and immediately, a little boy, no older than 3, bounded into the creek. The two had stared at each other for what seemed like forever. Into Hinako, the boy's sapphire blue eyes seemed to pierce into her soul more effectively than the masters of the Byakugan. She felt that her whole being had suddenly been laid bare for the young boy to see, to be judged whether or not she was a sinful beast or a creature of purity. Finally, the boy gave a smile and pointed at her with a cute pudgy hand. He opened his mouth and his little tones suddenly bounced out like a musical note. "You're a pretty Nasan." That had broken the ice. Hinako smiled at the memory. She remembered how she began to talk to the little boy, who displayed a startling degree of maturity even at that age. Though his mind was too young to comprehend it, the little Uzumaki Naruto seemed to have already realized to treat items carefully and spend money wisely. These were traits that even some adults had trouble in, and it astounded her that such a young boy could grasp it so easily. Of course, the conversation soon diverged to why she was in that crystal clear creek, and she embarrassedly stated that she got lost. The cute little boy had then jumped up to his feet and held on to her hands. "Don't worry, Nasan. I'll take you back and I'll make sure that I'll beat up all those big bad bullies for Nasan." It was such a cute, endearing sentence, and when they had returned to the entrance of the village, she had rewarded him with a kiss on his forehead. Back then, she had not known that he actually spent more time in the forest to the point where he knew different trees better than alleys and roads. Back then, she hadn't known that the boy reached his level of maturity because of the overwhelming biasness against him. She had simply found his resolve so amazingly adorable that she couldn't say no to him. Now that she thinks about it, Hinako can safely assume that little Uzumaki has forgotten those events. The mind of a child, no matter how mature, will eventually throw away past memories as more and more new ones replace it. With the trauma that little Uzumaki suffered in the next 3 years, she doubted that he would remember her as the one he vowed to protect from all those bullies. It pained her. It was such a hurtful feeling to know that a child, as pure as her own precious daughter, was subjugated to so many acts of cruelty. It hurt even more when the child was innocent of all sins and that he and his will was the only thing keeping the world safe from the monstrous entity sealed in his stomach. He deserved better, much better, and if she were to be the only one to offer a chance for a better life, then so be it. As if on cue, the door echoed with a series of knocks, jarring both Hinako and the silent Hayashi from their respective thoughts. The two gave a small glance to one another before the matriarch cleared her throat and called to the strangers outside. "Come in." The door slowly opened up and in walked Sarutobi, the Sandaime Hokage. Yet with him was the very same young boy that had been in her mind. The bandages had been removed, though it would seem that not much was done to heal his eyes, as he seemed to be squinting around, staring at things and bumping into furniture. "I hope we haven't been interrupting anything, Hinako." Sarutobi gave them a small smile. It waned a bit when he noted the tension that was still lingering in the room. Though it was rapidly disappearing, it clearly showed the rift that had suddenly grown between the husband and wife. It's no trouble." Hinako didn't want to delve back into her brooding over her husband. She slowly looked down towards the little blonde boy before her, immediately noting that his eyes were rather unfocused. Despite this, she gave him a warm smile. "Hello again, Naruto-kun." Naruto turned his head to the voice, looking at the blob of colors before him and, when figuring that it was the matriarch, gave a small bow. Hi." He spoke up rather lamely. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Hyuga-san." Hinako covered a smile. Clearly, etiquette was not his strong suit, and he was probably naturally shy, always hiding behind that grinning mask of his. "It's a pleasure to meet you too." Hinako slowly got up from her bed, ignoring the sudden tension that had seized her husband, and knelt down before the boy, close enough where he didn't have to look around. "I assume that Hokage-sama has told you about what I plan?" Naruto nodded. "Then are you willing to accept?" Naruto closed his eyes. Silence drifted into the room as all 3 applicants awaited the little boy's decision. When he opened his eyes once more, they were set in a determined expression. "Yes. I'll accept the adoption." Hinako smiled. She was glad. Now she can give him what he deserved, a home. "But..." Naruto looked up, meeting her almost squarely in the eye. "I don't want charity. It's okay if I have a place to sleep in, but I don't want to ask for much more. When the time comes and I can finally become a shinobi, then I would like to leave and live on my own again." He looked away from the matriarch, not knowing that she had been taken completely by surprise. She wanted to give him a home, a family that would perhaps be able to give some warmth into his life. Yet he wasn't going to accept it? "I don't want to intrude with your clan any more than I will." Ah, that was the reason. Naruto, after all the trauma he has suffered, he can't find it in himself to full trust people again. He is probably even more suspicious that the Hyuga would choose to adopt him. Or, he feels even more threatened by being adopted into a family as large as theirs. Perhaps it had been too quick. Hinako knew that Naruto had suffered much. Yet she was much too caught up in the possibilities to care at that time. She hadn't realized at that time that his reaction would be like this, even though it should have been obvious if one were to look closely. So you are saying that you are willing to become a ward, but not an official member? Naruto glanced over towards the old Hokage's direction, and nodded. Sarutobi made a contemplating noise as he looked up towards the ceiling. Choices and consequences went through his mind at incredible speed as he tried to see if anything were to be amiss in this decision. He found none. Or at least, he found none that would prove harmful to young Naruto's future. The old Hokage looked back down at the child before him, noting that he still had that incredibly determined expression on his face. He had learned long ago that whenever someone who has the same personality as Naruto acts like that, then there is no steering back from their decision. Very well, he conceded. Then Naruto-kun is hereby considered a ward of the Hyuga clan. It was not what she had wanted, but it was good enough. Hinako smiled at the boy and wrapped her arms around him in a warm embrace. He was still so suspicious of people, and she simply wanted to give him a home. It will take time for him to relax in her presence, but it is all right. She has time now. Time in which she can spend in mending the rift that had grown between her and all the people she had cared about. She will make sure that he shall be included as well. Naruto had stiffened immediately upon her embrace. What was this feeling? This incredibly warm feeling that made him feel so secure. It was unlike anything he had ever felt before. What is this? Naruto slowly closed his eyes and relaxed, allowing himself to succumb to her hug. It was a strange feeling. It made him feel protected, cared for. It's amazing. Hinako opened her eyes in surprise when suddenly, Naruto fell forward. She quickly pulled back and laid him down in panic. Had something happened? Had he suddenly fainted? To her bewilderment, the little boy fell deeper until he landed gently against her chest. Hinako pulled back just enough so that she could see his face and found that Naruto, during her embrace, had suddenly fallen asleep. She sighed softly as the boy snuggled into her. He merely fell asleep, nothing more. He seemed to also like the warmth her hug had given him as he continued to snuggle in until he found a comfortable niche to mold to. Hinako glanced down at the slumbering boy and gave him a smile. Rest, Naruto-kun. You've earned it. Everyone, I would like to introduce to you a new student. Due to some unforeseen circumstances, he was not able to attend classes at the beginning of the school term. Still, I expect everyone to treat him with respect. The young blonde walked up front and bowed before the silent class. My name is Uzumaki Naruto. It's a pleasure to meet you. There was no applause. Rather, everyone was busy scrutinizing the blonde boy before them. He was small, making his appearance to be even more immature than their own. Yet those pupilless eyes that seemed to resonate with pure apathy made him look much older than possible. To students who have shinobi parents, those eyes remind them of how their parents would look at times. His thin frame, made even more apparent with the seemingly oversized white shirt that he had, seemed fragile, as if he could break at the slightest touch, yet at the same time, he held himself tense, as if ready to react to anything. Finally, those whisker-like scars that adorned each side of his cheeks reminds them of a person more attuned to the wild, a person who was feral. Or to the female students, it made him look cute. Kawaii. When Naruto looked up, he was prepared to accept the cold stares that he had seen so many times in his life. He was resigned to the high possibility that they will look down at him, denying his existence in their eyes. He was not expecting this. For the most part, the boys were giving him neutral glances, shrugging his arrival away as another person in their classroom. When they had began clapping, the boys did so out of forced politeness. The girls, on the other hand, were blushing. Some were whispering and giggling at each other as they clapped, and truthfully, it unnerved him. What in the world were they talking about? Why did those eyes that watched him made him feel like a hamster running around a wheel for sheer amusement? Naruto repressed a shudder as he chose not to pursue the subject any further. He will have to get to that point when he reaches it. For now, he just wanted to get out of the limelight. The boy glanced up to his new teacher, who gave him an awkward smile. All right then, well, I suppose we have to find you a seat now, don't we? Let's see. He glanced around the classroom, looking for an empty seat that would seem suitable for him. Naruto, on the other hand, had his eyes already trained on that one single seat before him. He didn't even turn his gaze to anyone else as he began walking up the stairs and over to the empty seat caught in his eyes. When he reached it, Naruto glanced at the person sitting next to it. Is this seat taken? Dull deep sea blue met with warm lavender, as he smiled at the person before him. And no, you can sit here. The person blushed prettily as she moved her bag away from the table to make room for him. Naruto nodded his thanks as he sat down onto the seat. He turned his attention towards the one sitting next to him, and held out his hand and introduced himself. Uzumaki Naruto. If anything, the person's face reddened even more as she took his hand to hers and murmured out her own introduction. Hyuga Hinata. Naruto spared her a small, knowing smile as the two of them returned their attention to the Chunin instructor. Irika, seeing that Naruto has already chosen his seat, immediately began his lectures. There was a shuffle of movements as the students began to take out notes and pencils, all preparing themselves for another monotonous day of lectures and notes. Ayano, was that a good idea to trick the whole class? Hinata glanced worriedly towards Naruto as they walked together back to the Hyuga complex. At that time, Naruto had proposed that they act like friendly strangers to fool the whole class so that people would not know that he was actually in the Hyuga's care. A part of her, the small mischievous side that had been hidden away for a good amount of time, managed to coax her into agreeing with his plan. Yet she soon found herself asking why when they began their ruse. Was their friendship such a bad thing that they had to keep it a secret? If not, then was Naruto simply doing this out of spite to the students and teachers? She didn't know the reason, and she found herself strangely uncomfortable as their ruse continued on throughout the day. She wanted to be able to talk to him more freely. She wanted to treat him like the dear friend that he was. I can't say that it's a good idea, Naruto responded. But I don't think it would be a good idea to show everyone that we're friends. He glanced over towards her, hesitating with his answer, before continuing on. Many of the villagers hate me. I don't know why, but they like to treat me like dirt. For all I know, my parents could have been dishonorable to the village, or they simply hate the fact that I was born on the eve of the Kyuubi's defeat. All I know is that they treat me worse than dirt, and I know for a fact that some of their kids are in the class. When word spreads out that Uzumaki Naruto is now in the academy, the kids will no doubt be told by their moms and dads that I'm a bad person, that I'm someone to be hated. But you're not. Had anyone else been there to see the two of them, they would have been surprised beyond belief that the normally soft-spoken heiress had just shouted her denial. Hinata, upon hearing her voice reach a volume higher than ever before, gave a small eep, and covered her mouth in embarrassment. She glanced over towards the blonde, who was looking at her with surprise all over his features. If anything, her embarrassment grew. She had not meant to suddenly cut him off so loudly and sharply. It was just that she didn't want him to belittle himself even more. She simply wanted to make him see that he was not the monster everyone made him to be. She just wanted to help him. It's too late now. I already said it, I have to continue. Little Hinata steeled her resolve and returned her attention to Naruto, meeting his eyes with determination. Naruto-kun isn't a monster. He's a kind boy who tried to make many friends. I don't want you to keep talking about yourself like that. Naruto was surprised. No, he was more than just surprised. He was absolutely bewildered. The blonde had no idea that Hinata had it in her to make such an outburst. Just as well that she did, as her words had suddenly found themselves jarred into his ears. He was going to remember this for a long time. Heh. Though they had their differences in personality, Naruto saw some of Hyuga Hayashi in his daughter. How could he not when the clan head had said almost the exact same things in face of the Hyuga elders? The young boy turned his head up to the sky as he remembered what had transpired just a few days before. Flashback. If anything, Naruto did not feel nervousness or even terror in the face of the Hyuga elders and their seemingly X-ray vision. He had been subjected to levels of intimidation on such profound levels before that right now, their stares were met with equally apathetic eyes. Still, it was kind of good to know that there was someone standing next to him, if only because of duty to his wife's decision. There, also meeting the gazes of the elders, was Hyuga Hayashi, who stood in place of his wife to present his decision on the case of his adoption. We have heard young Uzumaki's reason for wanting to be adopted here, and we have heard the pleas of your wife, Hinako-dano. However, the question remains, what will be in our clan's favor for harboring Uzumaki-san? The head elder, Hyuga Shiro, spoke up calmly as he and the rest of the elders had their eyes fixed solely on the blonde before them. Naruto met their gaze passively. In fact, he was so emotionless to the dosage of pressure being applied to the room that one would have to wonder if he even felt any emotion at all. No boy that age should be able to handle this pressure around him as if it was just an everyday occurrence. The silence was broken by Hayashi, who took a step forward and responded to the elder's caution in adopting the boy. Would offering our protection to young Uzumaki be in our clan's best interest? The boy is already under the protection of Sandaime-sama, true, but have you considered who else had him in their favor? There was a general silence as some of the elders lowered their gaze almost shamefully away. That prompted Naruto to raise an eyebrow. Who had him in such a good light that the mere mention of this person is enough to have the Hyugas suddenly become complacent? During the battle with the Kyuubi no Kitsune, our clan suffered the least casualties. This is only because the Kyuubi's rampage was stopped before it could reach our sector. I cannot hope to imagine what would have happened had the Kyuubi stayed on its path of destruction. If anything, none of us would be here. Hayashi narrowed his eyes at his own father, the man who met his gaze calmly, the head elder. Are we so ungrateful that we are to deny Uzumaki's right to be protected when he holds the hope of the one who defeated the Kyuubi? Hayashi glanced down, and for a brief moment, Naruto was almost certain that a flicker of pain and nostalgia appeared in his eyes. Are we to throw away the legacy of Yondaime-sama? A pregnant silence fell into the council room. For the elders, they were taking this time to consider their options, torn between what they feel is best for their clan and the debt of honor they owe to Yondaime-sama, one that runs as deep as blood. But for Naruto, he found that his mind had suddenly frozen time, halting onto that one phrase over and over again. Legacy of Yondaime-sama. What did that mean? Naruto's eyes were wide and fearful as he felt his heartbeat quicken, his skin moisten, and his nerves screaming with anticipation. What was with that phrase? He was the Yondaime's legacy? Impossible! Why would he be his legacy, the one that he left behind? Hayashi-san, the clan head, glanced down from the brooding elders and met Naruto's fearful gaze calmly. Seeing those eyes acting so calm while his own was probably raging with emotion certainly did not help to calm him down. What did you mean by Yondaime-sama's legacy? Again, there was that flicker of nostalgia and pain from within Hayashi's eyes, though it was quickly masked. The clan head returned his gaze back to the elders before but left a clear message for the young blonde. It is not my place to tell. If you truly want to know, you must ask Sandaime-sama himself for the information. Not his place to tell? What did that mean? Why was he not able to tell him? Naruto bit his lip in anxiety at this. Was it such a secret that even a clan head is not allowed to speak of it? Why? Hayashi, the voice of the head elder, broke through the uncomfortable air between Hayashi and Naruto. The two quickly returned their attention to Higashiro, who was now standing up from his seat with the other elders. We have thought it over. We have pondered over the consequences in harboring young Uzumaki, but we have also thought about the possible rewards as well. As far as we can tell, the rewards more than make up for it. We also owe it to Yondaime-sama. We will make sure that his legacy will be cared for. The elder bowed his head to the young blonde. We welcome you, Uzumaki Naruto, into our clan. End flashback. And that was that. Naruto had been fully accepted as the clan's ward, and so far, he had been treated quite well by the Hyuga. Yet, something still nagged him terribly. Hyuga Hayashi had suddenly called him the legacy of the Yondaime, and it seemed that most of the adults know of this title as well. What irked him was that he knew nothing of this. Why was he known as the Yondaime's legacy? Why would he, a person who probably had no relations whatsoever to the great leader, be picked as the one that the Yondaime left behind? Hayashi had told him that if he wanted to know more, he had to ask Gigi for the information, but ever since, he has been hesitating. As tempting as it was to know why he was given such a title, Naruto was also too scared to find out. The people call him Yondaime's legacy. Yondaime-sama wouldn't need a legacy unless he had perished, and indeed, he had died 6 years ago. If he is to be known as that man's legacy, then what relation did he have to him? Naruto-kun? The boy broke off from his musings, returning his attention to the heiress who was walking next to him. Hinata looked on worriedly, unsure as to why he had suddenly gone silent. He looked troubled by something, and she didn't like the fact that she couldn't help him on it. Naruto shook his head at her, giving her a small, reassuring smile. It's nothing, he replied. I was just thinking about how everything still seems the same, that's all. Eh? The boy grinned. It's nothing, don't worry about it. Come on, I'll race you back. Naruto ran a few steps before turning around and beckoning her to follow. Though it still troubled her to have seen him back there, deep in what looked like negative thoughts, Hinata allowed herself to push those thoughts into the back of her mind. She smiled at Naruto and ran up to meet him. As the two of them raced back to the Hyuga complex, she couldn't help but wish these days could last forever. Hinako-sama, is it really alright for you to be walking around? You are still weak from your period of confinement. The Hyuga matriarch bowed her head in acknowledgement of that fact but continued walking until she was outside of the complex, and into their spacious backyard. Hinako stood in the center of their clan's peaceful garden, relishing in how quiet and tranquil it seemed. All around, it seemed the bustling of the village had dulled incredibly, leaving a personal area of pure, enjoyable silence. Or was that because the Hyugas live in the quietest part of the village? This feels nice, doesn't it, Niji-kun? Hinako turned back and gave her escort a smile. The young branch member, her nephew, did not look like he was enjoying it at all. Rather, he looked more like a wall than anything. I'm sorry, Hinako-sama, but I don't understand what you are trying to say. And she restrained herself from openly sighing. She couldn't blame her dear nephew for acting like this. After all, wasn't it the main family that had went and killed Hizashi in place of her husband? Although Hizashi himself had volunteered, Niji would no doubt blame the main family as the cause behind his father's death. He would see it as a sin in which the main family used to keep their members alive. The young boy would no doubt see her as a traitor, as she was once a part of the branch family as well. It was only her marriage with Hayashi that brought her to the main family. If anything, he resented her the most. Still, she had to keep trying. Niji is the last thing in which to remember Hizashi by. If anything, she owed it to that man to help Niji come out of his shell once more. Though it seemed to be a difficult task at the moment. Still, she had to try. Hinako gave the boy a smile and looked at the sky, feeling the breeze blow past her in gentle currents. I mean to be outside, Niji-kun. I mean that it feels nice to be able to feel the breeze of a gentle wind and to have it caress you with almost an intimate touch. She looked back down towards her apathetic nephew and arched an eyebrow. Don't you like to feel it too? Her question was met with a stone-cold stare. Niji pursed his lips and narrowed his eyes at the question. Even from where she was, Hinako could see that his fists were shaking with barely controlled anger. If anything, she expected him to lash out on her that very moment. But he didn't. Instead, the boy settled for a glare, something that Hinako would never reprimand him for, and few cold words. Even if the wind is to touch a person as intimate as you say, it is only to mask its true intentions. The wind is the cage that holds a bird. Should the bird try and fly away, it'll be killed in a second without remorse. Niji turned away from her and began to walk away. Excuse me, but I have urgent matters to attend to. Good day, Hinako-sama. Hinako watched on sadly as Niji disappeared into the Hyuga complex. She had remembered him 3 years ago, when he was so full of energy and pride for the Hyuga clan. Back then, he had been so eager to follow the code of the branch family, seeing it as a way to prolong the strength of the Hyuga. Then, he was betrayed. The main family substituted Hayashi with Hizashi, killing him so as to prevent a war to spark between Konoha and Kumo. Niji, upon learning of this, no longer found pride in being a Hyuga. He now saw the mark of the branch family as nothing more than a cage and the main family as the oppressors who would do anything to save their own skin, even to the point of sacrificing branch members to achieve that goal. And she was ashamed to admit that if she had to choose, she would definitely save the life of her husband first. The Hyuga matriarch sighed sorrowfully. What is she to do with him? Mother, we're home. She quickly masked her sadness away and planted a smile on her face as she turned towards the back entrance. There, Hinata stood, bent over and panting from exertion. Behind her, Naruto walked up calmly, though she could see traces of sweat on his skin. She arched an eyebrow at that. Were they running? From what? Hinata dear, why are you breathing so hard? The little Hyuga looked up and if anything, her flushed cheeks reddened even more. Ayano, she stammered out. It's well. We were racing. Naruto's voice came out lazily as he leaned on the wall behind him. It's nothing to fuss over. Hinata and I were bored, so I went on and thought it would be more fun to run home as fast as we can. Oh? Hinako looked from Hinata to Naruto to Hinata again. One looked nervous, poking her 2 fingers together in a cute fashion. The other was looking away, with his features carefully masked into a lazy, apathetic expression. Finally, she sighed and shook her head with a smile on her face. Well, I suppose it's good exercise for the 2 of you. Hinata looked up, obviously shocked that she was not receiving any form of punishment, and Naruto simply gave her a grin. Hinako leaned down close to her daughter and gave her a wink. Don't listen to the boring old men in our clan, Hinata. They don't know what's good for them. They'd rather stand tall and regal than to waste the energy to run and dirty their clothes. Again, her little daughter looked shocked. Finally, her eyes drooped, and she began to fiddle a bit once more. But the rules came from father. Hinako's smile saddened somewhat, something that Naruto had noticed immediately. Well, I suppose he only wants what's best for you. Her grin returned as she brought a finger to her lips in a sign of silence. But don't worry. I won't tell. Hinata's disbelief melted into a shy smile. Thank you, she said in a grateful tone. Hinako smiled and wrapped her arms around her daughter in a warm hug. It was good to feel her daughter again after so long. Unfortunately for her, Hinata had stiffened immediately on contact. Though it was brief and she quickly returned the action, Hinako had not missed that one moment of rigidness, and neither had Naruto. The boy arched an eyebrow from where he was, confused at the way Hinata had stiffened for that one moment. How strange. Is she still not used to seeing her mom or something? Hinako gave her daughter a soft pat on the head before gently pushing her away. Now go in, she ordered sweetly. And make sure you finish whatever homework that the academy gave you. You can work on other things once you've finished. Hinata gave her mother a shy smile and nodded before turning around and quickly making her way into the compound. The Hyuga matriarch watched her daughter go with a forlorn expression on her face, feeling a sense of longing welling up in her. She wanted to hold her daughter close to her, to love her even after the year that they'd been separated. But she knew that Hinata still needed some time to herself. The scars of an abused mental state cannot be undone just like that. She needed to be patient if she is to be able to help her daughter heal. Sudden footsteps quickly broke her from her musings. The matriarch turned her head behind her, wary of who the person was, until she remembered that it was Naruto who had been leaning against the wall. She relaxed herself and offered the boy an apologetic smile, one which he seemed to have understood. The two slowly began their track back into the Hyuga compound, both not really having any reason to hurry. Hinako glanced down at the boy before her, who had his hands in his pant pockets and was staring at the complex with emotionless eyes. It slightly unnerved her to see how a few simple changes had made him seem like a total stranger. Back then, Naruto was a seemingly cheerful boy with bright sky blue eyes. Now, almost all of that cheerfulness had disappeared, leaving a more reserved boy with solemn features not unlike those among veteran shinobis. It certainly didn't help that his new deep ocean blue eyes made him look all the more closed off from the world. Do I look like a freak? The sudden question caught her completely by surprise. She had not thought that he would have noticed her looking him over. It unnerved her even more that he spoke of himself as a freak so casually. She shook her head and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. No, she murmured in return. You don't look like one at all. Really? Naruto looked up towards her, his eyes unbelieving. Really? You're a special boy, who's been given a gift. It is only because the villagers cannot see it that way that they shun you. Hinako knelt down and hugged him gently. But I see it that way, and for that, I don't think you're a freak at all. Naruto stayed silent, deciding to merely stand content within her arms. You're not a freak at all. You're a blessing, a reminder of that those who sacrificed themselves did not do so in vain. The night was cold, almost unnaturally so. Just about everyone in the village were indoors now, as the cold night air outside made many reconsider the thought of venturing anywhere else. Of course, there are some definite exceptions. Hyuga Hinata stirred restlessly on her futon, trying to find the best possible spot in which she could finally fall asleep in. She hated nights like these. For some reason, whenever it gets cold enough like now, she would find it next to impossible to find rest. Piling sheets on top of sheets didn't help at all, and for the most part, only sheer exhaustion to the highest degree can knock her out. She highly doubted that she'll be sleeping anytime soon. Frustrated, the young Hyuga sat up from her futon. She slowly got up, shivering, and padded over to her door. Maybe some water will help me go to sleep. There would be times in which drinking some form of liquid would help her. Though most of those times involved a stressful state that needed to be relaxed, there were the few instances in which she could sleep after getting something to drink. Hinata stifled a yawn as she slid open her door. And stopped completely. The young Hyuga stared up at the wall of her complex, where the moon shone brightly in the clear night sky. There, a silhouette was crouching on the roof of the wall, seemingly staring at something. As far as she could tell, this person was either going to sneak in or out, and both aren't ideas she is very happy to think about. Hinata quickly formed a ram hand seal and closed her eyes. She remembered the training she had received since she was 3, with the elders and her father teaching her how to pump chakra into her eyes. Though she had only accomplished some of the more basic of chakra control, she needed to use it this once to see who that person is. Byakugan. Hinata felt the telltale signs of veins growing, and knowing that she only had a few moments, quickly opened her eyes. The strength of her Byakugan allowed her to quickly lengthen her vision until she was able to see the person much more closely. Her Dijutsu also allowed her to have better vision in the dark, allowing her to quickly make out just who that person was. When she saw him, she gasped. The person crouching on the wall was Naruto. Bewildered, she quickly deactivated her Byakugan. Why was Naruto up and ready to leave? Clearly, His actions are incredibly suspicious, and she couldn't help but be reminded of what her father had told about the Cloud Ninja and the sacrifice of Uncle Hisashi. Was he thinking of kidnapping someone as well? Suddenly, Naruto leapt off of the wall, disappearing from her sight. Hinata, being determined to find out just what was going on, quickly pulled on a large jacket over her yukata and ran out of her room, intent on catching up to the blonde. Hayashi-sama, the clan head, opened his eyes, resting his gaze onto his wife calmly. Hinako, on the other hand, looked worried. They both had heard the footsteps that came from the other side of the main family complex. They both knew that that side of the complex was where both Hinata and Naruto slept in. Hinako was worried. Was there another ninja that attempting a kidnap on her daughter? Or was it a shinobi who knew of Naruto's whereabouts, and trying to take him away to be killed silently? The matriarchs sat up from their bed, just 2 seconds away from bolting it, and tailing whoever left those footsteps, when Hayashi gently grabbed her arm. He shook his head when she looked at him questioningly, and gently pulled her back down. Hinako found she had no time to be playing around. Hayashi-sama, why aren't we going after them? They could have taken Hinata or Nara-dash. Whatever she was about to say was silenced by a finger pressed against her lips. Surprised, she looked up to see her husband watching her calmly, with no trace of anger or resentment. If anything, he looked reserved, as if accepting anything thrown at him. Let them go, my dear. They need to know about this the most. They? You already know who those footsteps belong to. Yes. Hayashi closed his eyes for a moment as he contented himself with her warmth and presence. Then who are they? The first one was little Uzumaki. The second belonged to our daughter. Hayashi sighed and positioned himself into a more relaxed position before continuing. I've known ever since I presented my case to the Hyuga elders that Uzumaki would be wanting to seek answers. I merely provided the information in where to get the answers. He turned towards her and opened his eyes, matching her gaze calmly and without fear. If you were the boy, would you not want to know the reason behind your discrimination? That's true, but how will he take that news? Hayashi looked away, his expression suddenly turning into one of worry. This was enough to prod her attention. Hayashi-sama? A few months ago, I was one of the representatives sent as ambassadors for Sunigakure. During our week-long stay, I noticed something strangely familiar in that village. A boy was discriminated against, treated as a monster, and never to be in touch with anyone. That boy was also a container for a sealed bijou. Hinako gasped. Suna has a container as well? As I was staying there, I could not help but notice the similarities in how they are treated. However, that boy's exposure had already progressed much deeper than Uzumaki's. It certainly didn't help that the boy was an insomniac. It is highly likely that that boy's sanity will have already deteriorated by now due to both the insomnia his possesses and the discrimination the village gives him. If we are not careful, Uzumaki will be just like that. Hinako was silent as she mulled over what her husband had said. Finally, she propped herself up on an elbow to meet his gaze. Tell me, she said quietly. Tell me why you did what you did to our daughter. Naruto was silent as he made his way through the floors of the Hokage Tower. It was surprisingly easy to get past the guards, especially since they were indoors to stay warm. All he needed were a few well-placed sleeping gas and the guards dropped like logs. He had planned this. Ever since Hayashi had spoken of him and his partial identity, he had plotted for this day. Now, he's going to make sure that the one person capable of telling him will not leave the tower without doing so. Naruto narrowed his eyes and made his way towards the final room, so focused on his task that he did not notice the silent shadow hiding near the corner. Hinata watched unworriedly as Naruto stood in front of the Hokage's doors. For some reason, he had decided to see the old Hokage, even going so far as to knock out the guards. She did not know what the reason was, but she knew that actions such as those were a crime. She didn't want to see him get punished. On the one hand, he looked serious. That had been the first time she had ever seen that expression on his face. Naruto-kun, why is this so important? Why couldn't you wait? Hinata was jarred from her thoughts as the door was pushed open. She quickly made her way to the door and peered inside. Naruto narrowed his eyes and walked in, meeting the calm gaze of Sarutobi Hiruzen, the Sandaime Hokage. The old Hokage met his gaze calmly, like gentle rapids. It pissed him off. I think you know why I'm here, Gigi. Sarutobi closed his eyes and nodded. Yes, he replied. Hayashi told me to expect you to come. Good. Naruto glared at him and nodded towards the darkened portrait of the Yondaime. Then you can start by fessing up. Why am I known as the Yondaime's legacy? More importantly, why is this linked to how I've been treated? Naruto walked over to Sarutobi and placed his hands on the desk to help him lean forward. Leave nothing out. Uchiha Sasuke found that he could not sleep at all that night. He had been tossing and turning around restlessly in his apartment ever since he fell into his bed. Images of his clan's slaughter and his brother's identity as the murderer still haunts him even though it's been months now. It certainly didn't help that for some reason, his room was uncomfortably warm. Kyuso. The young Uchiha grunted in annoyance and slowly got out of bed. He brought a hand up to feel his forehead and was surprised to feel sweat close to dripping from his face. Had it really been that warm? He muttered quietly. Maybe some fresh air can do me good. He went over and opened up a window, allowing the breeze to cool down his body and the room. It felt good. He liked the feeling of a cold breeze going through his body, rejuvenating it and sharpening his groggy mind. Sasuke leaned out of the window, staring at the dark expanse that was his village, lost in thought over his childhood. He remembered how in nights like these, his mother would go into his room to make sure that he was warm and asleep. During the rare instances when he would be awake, she would gather him in her arms and wrap the blanket around the both of them. The comfortable warmth and the soft lullaby tune that she would hum would always have him drift to sleep in no time. It was moments like those that he cherished greatly. But all of that is gone now. His mother is dead along with his father and the rest of his clan. Sasuke clenched a fist with anger and hatred at that. His clan was all gone, massacred by his brother. Even now, after months of therapy and rest, he could still hear the dying screams of his clansmen, all projected by his brother's new Sharingan. Kyuso, he needs power. He needs to have strength so that he can avenge the deaths of his clan. Only when he could feel the life leaving his brother's body will he be able to feel their spirits rest and their death cries wither. The young Uchiha heaved a sigh. Whenever he thought about his clan and his brother, an incredible weight would settle in his heart. In time, it would leave, but its presence would always remain. It was like a reminder to him that he cannot stray from his path, that he must set out and take revenge for his dead clansmen. Sasuke didn't need to be reminded. He knew his path. And when the time comes, I'll restore the Uchiha clan and protect it for as long as I live. That's a promise, huh? A sudden movement caught his attention. Sasuke glanced down at the dark roofs just below his apartment. For a second, he thought he saw something move. Was it his imagination? No, there. From within the darkness, he could see the silhouette of a person crouching against a wall, peering out to see if there were anyone in his path. The figure glanced around him for a bit before hopping over the wall and continuing his trek through the village. Now, if that wasn't suspicious, then he needed a brain test. It wasn't just the fact that the person was clearly trying to sneak somewhere. It also mattered that whoever this person was, he was heading straight towards the Hokage's tower. Sasuke wouldn't like to admit it, but the old Sandaime has a special place in his heart, for he was the one to help him when he was still in that trauma. If there was anything he could do, he would do it. It also didn't help that he was now curious to know who would be sneaking out at night. I wasn't really tired anyway. Sasuke reached out to grab a jacket, wrapped it around himself, and leapt out of the window to land on the roof below. By now, the figure was almost unseen due to the distance and dimness of the night. Sasuke gave a soft curse as he began his pursuit on the person. The cold night air whipped his body like a river current as he ran and jumped over roofs in his chase for the mysterious sneak. It didn't really matter to Sasuke as he had his jacket and the exercise to keep himself from shivering. Right now, if anything, the cold wind was making him excited. Adrenaline pumped into his veins, giving him a sense of a thrill in this cold night chase. Yet even in this breath moment of excitement, he was worried. Who was this person? Who would have the audacity or recklessness to be sneaking to the Hokage's tower? Sasuke knew that the Sandaime was old and a little weird, but he was given the title of Hokage, and if Iruka-sensei's lectures were true, then he was once hailed as the god amongst shinobis. Even in old age, it would at least take another Kage to defeat him. Who would be stupid enough to try in this village? Or was this person even trying at all? Sasuke narrowed his eyes in frustration. He hated not knowing things. A series of light steps from the ground suddenly caught his attention. Glancing down, he saw another person just a little ahead of him giving chase to the hidden figure as well. However, either this person did not care to be spotted or figured that heading to the tower from the ground would be much easier than jumping over rooftops. Sasuke would have to agree on that. Thankfully though, a few lights were still on in the form of streetlights. The person on the ground was much easier to be made out. At first glance, in the moment light flashed the person's body, he knew who it was. Only one person would have a traditional haircut like that. It was Hyuga Hinata. Now he was even more curious. Who could it be that would have the Hyuga girl chase after in such a hurry? Was it another clan member? Sasuke shook his head and continued his track. He didn't have to worry about the Hyuga catching him. She looked too engrossed in tailing that person to notice him anyways. He didn't know if he should feel grateful or insulted. The boy grimaced at his scattered thinking. Why in the world was he worried about that when he should be tailing the person as well? Sasuke returned his attention to the shadowed person, only to find that he had disappeared. What? Sasuke sped up even more, now looking around frantically for the person that he had lost. Yet no matter where he looked, the roofs were bare of anyone besides him. Damn it! I only looked away for a second. Where did he go? Sasuke gritted his teeth in anger. If only he had the Sharingan activated, then he wouldn't have to worry about looking hard for anything in this stupid darkness. No, wait. That person was heading straight towards the Hokage's tower, and now, it's right in front of them. If anything, that person would be trying to scale the walls, hoping to get directly to the Hokage's room unless. Sasuke glanced down from the roof and almost fell over. The idiot mystery person was right there, pushing on the door. Unless someone's stupid enough to go in from the front entrance. As the figure rushed into the Hokage's tower, Sasuke quickly jumped off of a railing, using elementary chakra control to increase his leap. The dark-haired youth landed on the third roof of the tower, and immediately jumped again. He continued doing this until finally, he reached the top roof. Upon landing, Sasuke quickly headed over towards a ventilation shaft, kicking open the bars before diving in. He had to get into the Hokage's room, to see what is going to happen, if anything at all. Yet when Sasuke finally reached the end of the shaft and the top of the ceiling floor, he heard nothing. It was odd that there was no noise, as the person would have most likely triggered some type of alarm. Who else would be stupid enough to dive in from the bottom? Sasuke slowly made his way towards the opening to the ceiling, being careful to creep as slowly and cautiously as possible. After all, he highly doubted that the Hokage would think highly of him if he were to be caught sneaking into his office. When Sasuke peered down, he found nothing out of the ordinary. The Hokage was down there, smoking on that pipe of his, and staring straight across. Wait, why was he staring across? Suddenly, the sounds of doors being pushed open rang out from within the silent office. Sasuke felt a stir well up in him. That person managed to get through 18 floors without triggering a single alarm? Impossible. I assume you know why I'm here, Gigi. That voice sounded somewhat familiar. Sasuke knew he heard it before, but he couldn't place it. It definitely wasn't Itachi's, but it definitely belongs to someone from within the village. The voice sounded young too, meaning that this person cannot possibly be that much older than him. A kid like him, sneaking past 18 floors of security without triggering a single alarm. Yes. Sasuke quickly returned his attention to the old Hokage, who replied to the kid's accusation. Hayashi told me to expect you to come. Hayashi. Sasuke knew he heard that name before as well. If memory serves, Hayashi is the given name of the Hyuga clan head. He is quite famous for being a strict and collected person. Or at least, that's what his father had told him from before. But what did the clan head have to do with this? First the girl, Hinata, was chasing after this kid, now they mention the head of the Hyuga clan too? What's going on? Good. The kid replied. Then you can start by fessing up. Why am I known as the Yandame's legacy? More importantly, why is this linked to how I've been treated? As the kid said this, his voice got closer and closer, indicating that he was walking over towards the Hokage's desk. Finally, Sasuke was able to glimpse at the kid as he placed his hands firmly on the Hokage's desk. The Uchiha felt his eyes widened in disbelief. He definitely knew who that kid was. Messy blonde hair. Deep blue eyes with no pupils. 3 whisker marks on each cheek. Leave nothing out. Uzumaki Naruto. There was a time in Sarutobi Hiruzen's life where he felt he could have taken on the whole shinobi world and still come out on top. Back then, he had the backing of the village, of Fire Country, and of their pride to ensure that he could travel to hell and back, to return to them. But that was too many years ago and after too many hard decisions. Now, Hiruzen can only feel sorrow and guilt in his being. The once great love he had for the village had dimmed with age and sacrifice, and he can no longer feel the power of their backing anymore. He feels guilt over the fact that it was not he, the previous generation, to have made the ultimate sacrifice those few years ago, leaving his successor to take that mantle and die in his place. He felt sorrow that a legacy was left when it was not its time, and that the people, so caught up in their fear and sorrow, lashed on its innocent soul. Now, that same legacy is standing before him, demanding answers that he has the right to know. Hiruzen glanced up at the portrait hung on the ceiling. Yandame's solemn expression, mixed in with the darkness, made him look as he was accusing him of not protecting Naruto enough, of allowing the village to become what it has. He bowed his head away from the portrait, acutely aware that his failures have finally borne the fruits of his consequences. He now had to prepare himself, to allow his being to accept the consequences and to try and right the wrong done. But he is old, and now his heart is faint on certain subjects. It is his fear of the boy's reaction to every news given that has stopped him from telling till now. Even now that the boy is right in front of him, Hiruzen can feel the reluctance to divulge everything to him, if only because he does not think the boy is strong enough to protect himself with that knowledge. Unfortunately, I cannot tell you everything. If you want to know the truth of your heritage, you have to become strong enough to defend it. Hiruzen leaned back into his chair, puffing at his pipe as he said this. However, I will not deny you the right to know what happened when you were born. He motioned for Naruto to sit, and after a moment, he did. 6 years ago, our village was beginning to emerge as the superpower amongst all other shinobi villages. We had an abundance in resources, solid treaties with neighboring countries, and an army of shinobis numbering to the thousands. Back then, I had retired, and as you know, my successor became the Yandame. During his reign, the village prospered greatly and generally, everything was peaceful. Naruto felt like he was being lectured in a history class. He already knew what Sandangiji was saying. Yet, why was he saying this again? And why was his tone so grave? It is during our greatest peak in strength that suddenly, a disaster struck the village. Hiruzen got up from his chair and walked over to the large window behind him, to help him see the village in its dark glory. He felt that if he had stayed in his seat, he would not be able to meet Naruto's gaze, especially not after what he will tell him. The Kyuubi no Kitsune, greatest of the 9, attacked Konoha. Its strength was so powerful that from where it was, it could cause a wave of heat and wind to tear off buildings like a hurricane, with a simple swipe of its claws. Thousands of brave shinobis went to meet the demon head-on, stalling its rampage as best they could. Sarutobi closed his eyes in sorrow. Many of them perished before the demon's rage. The death toll kept mounting until finally, the Yandame managed to prepare his method for defeating the Bija. With the strength of his chakra and a pact with the Shinigami, he managed to defeat the Kyuubi at the cost of his life. Will you quit it already? Naruto stood up impatiently and banged his fist onto the desk in anger. I already know all of this. What I don't know is what does this all have to do with me? Hiruzen took the pipe from his mouth and exhaled, breathing out a steady cloud of smoke. He then replied slowly, almost reluctantly. The tale of the Yandame killing the Kyuubi was a lie. Whatever anger that was still in Naruto suddenly flowed out in shock. It was a lie? Does that mean that the Yandame was not as great a hero as everyone made him out to be? Why was that tale lied about in the first place? The tale of the Yandame killing the Kyuubi was put in place to make sure that the future generation, those that were too young to know, would never realize the truth. I even decreed that speaking of the truth was an S-class felony with execution as the consequence. Why would the old man go to such lengths to protect this secret? Why? The truth is, the Yandame did not have the strength to kill the Kyuubi. There is no possible way for anyone to be able to kill a Bija, for they are a representation of the world and its chaotic elements. So, he devised another way to defeat the demon. The Yandame was a master of Fuinjutsu, seal techniques, and during the Kyuubi's rampage, he had been working non-stop to perfect a particular seal that he knew would be able to defeat the monster. Then, on that faithful evening, Yandame rode out atop Gamabunta's head and performed the seal. He sacrificed his own soul so that the Shinigami, an entity greater than even the earthly demons, would be able to tear out the Kyuubi's soul and chakra from its body. However, Yandame also needed a container with which to hold that soul and chakra in. He needed a child whose umbilical cord was freshly cut and whose chakra coils were not developed. Naruto suddenly felt a sense of foreboding well up within him. His eyes were wide and his body moistened with sweat. It can't be, it's impossible. What are you saying? Hiruzen finally turned away from the window and met Naruto's fearful gaze calmly. He fully turned himself to give the boy his attention and answered. On that night, a child was born. On that night, a demon was defeated. The Yandame could not kill the demon, so he sealed it away into a newborn child. That child was you, Naruto. You are the prison and the jailer for the most powerful Bijuu in existence. You are the container for the Kyuubi no Kitsune. It had almost been a week since that fateful night. Ever since then, Naruto had kept himself to his room, refusing all entries and never stepping out of those doors. The only indication that he was even alive were those moments when Hinata would bring a tray of foods, and when she returned, they would be out and empty. Naturally, Hinata and her parents were worried for him. They all had a feeling that something was wrong, that something terrible was going to happen to Naruto, yet he would refuse to allow them to see him, would ignore their attempts to talk. Through this all, Hinata herself was feeling a mixture of shock and guilt. She knew the moment when she had seen Naruto that night overlooking the village.